Sphinx is there in the background. Okay, so we're approaching the entrance to the Osiris shaft. And this is another shaft that's next to it. Excuse me, Mom.
Be careful.
Very careful. So this is looking down into level 1. Again, it's a drop of about 30 feet. Next one's about 100 feet. And then 60 feet down into the water. Okay, we're in the first level. Thankfully, they've rebuilt the ladders because before they were very rickety. And the rest coming down. Sorry about the jiggling, I'm mildly excited. So here's the way down to the second level.
It's one thing to be on a hot air balloon in the basket.
Okay, keep going, please. So in this niche, we have a hole that would fit a human-sized sarcophagus. Then we have these two big boxes. Again, the material is called dacite. It is not from Egypt. It might be from Turkey. I have to ask Susan. But this is the one that has the black goo inside and outside and on the ceiling. And according to Susan, it's a bitumen material, which is an oil-based material. And is a lubricant for a pump or something like that, so it's not ancient. But you notice the lid is a jar on this. That's what we're going to see when we go to the Serapeum. All the lids in the Serapeum were found ajar except one. And this is the other box. Does someone have a light they could shine here, please? Into the box. Oh, that's great, right there. That's great. So you can see this box suffered some kind of damage. To me, it looks like it exploded from the inside out. And this box as well is made of what's called dacite, which is not basalt. It is not a type of granite. did your wife not want to come?
She did not.
She's what?
She has fear of
Oh,
heights.
heights.
Yes, just me. She said, go have fun.
Good.
So I recently saw a video about the goo, and that the same black goo is on that pump.
Yeah.
And they speculate that it was maybe oil-based or petroleum-based, and they had put maybe the pump on top of that sarcophagus and had been pouring the oil or whatever petroleum in it for it to run, and that's why it ran into the sarcophagus.
Yeah, and it's on the ceiling too. Excuse me. Excuse me. So here you see the tool marks are at a 45-degree angle. Very similar to what we see at Petra in Jordan and at Baalbek in Lebanon. Now we're looking into level number 3. Is anyone down there? Okay. How much space? Space for how many people? And now we have more tool marks. Again, most are at about a 45-degree angle. So this is my third trip into the Osiris shaft. The first time we came, we were allowed to film everything. Second time, we were forbidden. This time, we're filming everything we want. We don't even have one of the guards down here with us. So thanks to Mo Taha of Select Egypt Travel for allowing us to come in here and experience this. It's not hot in here, but it's very humid. So can only one person fit at the bottom at one time? Oh. Yeah, the water level goes up and down. Our geologist, Susan Moore. You want to speak?
Of something in the very back there, and that I think is what I sort of, what I mentioned in my lecture, the chelated iron cement that's come through here. And as we're walking back up the causeway, you can see that running down the causeway. And what they were doing underneath the pyramid, or how to access it, or if that was important at all, remains to be seen. But I think it's something that just fascinates me that it's there. Anyway, the box in here, it's more of a crude box compared to the Serapeum, and we'll see the Serapeum boxes tomorrow, and they are bigger and just done perfectly. Now, as to the material, I've heard people call it a dacite. It might be, but I haven't found any literature in them telling me why it's a dacite. But you do find dacite, which is a volcanic rock in the eastern desert. So it's possible. But, you know, we're finding an awful lot of gray boxes that have been painted black. Now, the goo that you're sniffing right now,
What the hell?
we actually were able to analyze a bit of it, but it was a small piece, so we didn't get a full analysis. But the analysis of it is a hydrocarbon. And
Do humans have to die?
This is the first moment where we can say death is a maybe.
Brian Johnson is determined to live forever or die trying.
Which he believes may happen in our lifetime.
Everything we understand about reality may be called into question.
The tech genius is worth $800 million and has pledged almost every cent of it to uncovering the secret to eternal youth.
If you had an algorithm that could give you the best physical, emotional, and spiritual health of your life, would you say yes to it? And so we looked through all the scientific evidence, and we put all the science into me. And then I became the most measured person in human history.
What's your relationship with God?
This is such a delicious conversation because I remember in Mormonism,
Delicious is great, right? What's up, everybody? Welcome to Flagrant, and today we are joined by a 46-year-old man with an 18-year-old cock.
yeah.
And if that doesn't get you interested, I do not know what will. He has spent millions of his own dollars to never die. Give it up for Brian Johnson. Okay. First question, and we're going to get to the cock, we're going to get to all these different things, but do humans have to die?
For the first time in human history, it's a question, it's a maybe. This is the thing. This is the most significant revolution in 200,000 years of being a Homo sapiens.
Okay.
Death has always been inevitable, and that leads to all the solutions we've had about death. We say live fast, die young. We create religions. We create stories about death, how it renews and how it's great. But this is the first moment after 4.5 billion years where we can say death is a maybe.
And why do you feel it's a maybe?
If you look at the speed of progress of artificial intelligence and the gains in medical technologies, it's possible that we will be able to arrest aging.
Can you explain how AI would help?
So if you take, all right, so humans are the most intelligent, we are a formidable form of intelligence. Humans can solve things.
This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
Yo, what's up, Zidabatum? Thanks, dude. Thank you. What's up?
Gentlemen, this is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. We got everybody in their various studios here, and normal guy Mike in the NSA control center over there. How you doing, Mike?
The guys behind me say hello.
Yeah.
Command Central.
Keeping an eye on us.
They say hello to us every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but for this occasion, yeah, Mike asked while we're recording if everybody could just sit really still.
Right.
And they were cool.
Keep it down back there.
Yeah. So I think this evening
still setting up.
We're going to get into some mound stuff, right, Randall? We're going to talk about the mound culture, some of the sites.
Yeah, let's. Hey, what a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just came up with that just now. Yeah.
Yeah, man. That's yeah, we're kind of thinking along parallel lines. And speaking of parallel lines, yeah, one of the things we'll look at is parallel line. Parallel lines. You know what barrows are? Long barrows. They call them long barrows in England, but they're the same thing here. We'll look at some of those. That's where we got two mounds, elongated mounds running parallel to each other. And there was a lot of that. A lot of it, as we'll discover here.
Like like it has a low space between them, like a
imagine you've got two raised embankments,
artificial canyon.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
We'll take a quick look at the. What did Brad say?
Reverse cart rut.
Well, in a way, kind of in a way, yeah. Well,
Nice.
I know everybody here is familiar with Serpent Mound. I think we've all been there, right?
Yes.
Do we know about Normal Guy?
The mounds?
Serpent Mound. You ever been to Serpent Mound?
Have not been to Serpent Mound. We've been to. I was with you when we went to the Cahokia Mounds in Missouri.
You were there?
Cahokia.
Well, no, that was. I'm sorry, that was Brad.
Illinois.
Me and
Yeah,
Brad.
we went by there on the way out to Washington back
Okay,
10
yeah.
years ago. Yeah.
That was impressive. I'd never seen that before. I was truly impressed by that site.
Yeah. Well, so was I. I'm still continuing to be impressed. And then you get even more impressed when you start thinking about, it's enough to, when you're thinking about one individual structure. But then when you realize the scale and scope of the whole phenomena, it's almost unbelievable in its own way. I mean, So that's one of the things is, most people immediately, like, especially if you're in America and you start thinking about ancient ruins and stuff, you start thinking about Egypt and Greece and Babylonia, you might think of Central America, but you're thinking about all these other places, forgetting or not having realized in the first place that right here in America, we have remnants of tons of stuff that are on such a vast and awesome scale that it's really almost hard to wrap your head around.
And the other thing that struck me is we've got there are plenty of reconstructed villages. I think Creek Indian and Cherokee, Creek, Muskogee Indian,
Creek,
around the South. And you begin to realize they had cities, they had villages that were good size and well organized. They were not, they weren't the stereotypical villages we see in the tent cities and the teepees that you see in the Plains Indians. These were cities.
Yeah.
With networks and roads between them.
Networks of trade that were far flung.
Yeah.
Even, trade with, so the Eastern Woodlands were trading with Central America. Now think about that. That's, and now I haven't looked into it particularly in depth, but the amount of trade that was going on between Central, say, and South America. And there was trade going on. And we know that there was some kind of cultural context, but I wonder and think about how extensive was the network of cultural interconnections, let's say between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. I think we're finding out that it's a lot more extensive than was even pictured a few decades ago. And these people were up to things that we're still just at the very beginning of figuring out.
And the copper up in Michigan found its way long distances, didn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's a good example. That's a great example. I did visit one of those copper mines back in '97, and it was quite interesting. It was when we were up there, we were shooting for Fire from the Sky, and we had gone up to Peshtigo, and that was when I, visited the Peshtigo Museum, and we interviewed Robert, forget his last name.
Thank you,
He was
Scully.
the curator of the museum. But near there was the remnants of a huge copper mine. I don't remember exactly where I could find it again.
Pretty lame, what?
96 actually, I think, when I went there. But
it didn't give like the Scully accent or whatever.
Then I think there were other copper mines in Michigan, right? Wasn't that where a lot of those copper mines are in Michigan?
Yep.
Right.
Have you guys looked into those at all? And the sheer volume
I
of
didn't know
copper
Scully
that
had
has
an
been-
accent.
We have. It was a lot of copper was moved out of there. They found lots and lots of hammers, tools as well. But
And
no
what was the-
one is clear on where the copper went.
Well,
or
that's
who the people were because they weren't living there.
yeah.
No bodies, right?
Yeah.
Like no settlements. It was
Mm-hmm.
like a seasonal thing, and they came, they mined, and then they left.
Now, do you remember the dating on there? I mean, if my memory serves me correct, this was actually over a fairly long span of time that this was being mined.
Yeah.
Some of these sites.
Yeah.
But I wonder when the latest dating was. The youngest, before they were finally the whole.
I can look it up real quick if I can find.
That would
but
be
yeah,
interesting.
It was old. I mean, it's not, and it's not really explained who it was or where it went.
And where
some
it went.
people think it may have fueled the Bronze Age. Across the ocean, but then that would imply transatlantic trade at a time when there wasn't supposed to be.
Impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can just not even think about that one more nanosecond because it's impossible.
It's impossible.
Totally impossible.
No further consideration. We know that there are certain things impossible. And you know why we know that? Because we are part of this elite cadre that has a monopoly on reality.
Yeah.
My theory is that the people who mined that copper are the ant people. It makes sense because the people that wrote or talked about the ant people or have these legends of the ant people. What better people to call the ant people than the guys coming in and out of the ground and having trails all the way to the sea?
So okay.
This is from nps.gov, so it's totally official.
100% correct.
National Park Service. I guess the mines are now part of a park.
We can stake our lives on the complete and 100% truthfulness and accuracy of this, right?
7,000 years ago.
7,000
is when it started. They estimate.
Wow. So that
sounds familiar. Now.
Interesting. So during the early, that would be, that's kind of in that transition between what you would say early and mid Holocene, but it was definitely still during
5,000 BC, right?
5,000 BC, and you're still in the climatic optimum. So then, are they speculating how long the quarrying operations lasted?
The next entry in their timeline is 1771. So no.
Oh no.
But the first thing on this page is really interesting. A partial serpent artifact made of Lake Superior copper, which was found at the Effigy Mounds National Monument in Iowa. I can't really show this to you, but there's this beautiful. See that?
I can barely make. If you could put it closer,
like a dagger, or is it real small?
Oh yeah, I see it now. Yeah.
There's no autofocus on that camera.
It doesn't focus.
I turned it off.
Okay. Well.
So, then they start with 1771 when Alexander Henry makes the first English attempt to mine the copper, and then goes on from there. But they found, tools and lots of remnants of the previous people.
Speaking of previous people.
And people.
But before we get away from it, let's talk for just a second about this whole ant people thing. So ever since I read those Hopi accounts, I go in my head, okay, now ant people, I'm not envisioning like giant hybrid hominid as ants walking around. They look like ants. I'm thinking that obviously that they're people who are living underground. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so then when we get away from the mythic aspect of it, we acknowledge that there are realities behind the myths. Then it really comes down to like, okay, if we accept that there were real people that gave rise to this image of the ant people that found its way into, Hopi mythology, who were they? So there's some reality, some historical reality behind it. There's a whole, in other words, here we say ant people. What do we know about them? Virtually nothing. But you got to realize that there's undoubtedly a whole gigantic, profound story behind that.
Yeah, on our show we've talked about it multiple times, and Kyle made the great point that like if you see a mining operation.
That's how I envision what Moonraker looks like.
People and equipment going in and out of a hole in the
I envision Moonraker looks like Commander Riker, smiling.
Look like ants.
Okay.
So if you were some other culture and you came along
saying
and like, the ant people, it's the people that come here and digging holes in the ground and carrying stuff out. They look like ants. That could be the source of something like that. Could be as simple as that. The source of the
bugger. Now, then my question would be, were they digging holes or were they utilizing natural caves?
Yeah.
I don't know, but see, that gets into the story, and
Yeah.
I've just for years been curious about, well, who the hell were those people actually?
Yeah.
We know a lot about the Hopi, and through the Hopi, we know that there was this group, some cultural group, called the Ant People, that by affiliating, allying with the Ant People, they were saved from a tremendous catastrophe.
Didn't they say that they emerged after the catastrophe from the Ant People's place below ground, somewhere in the Grand Canyon area?
Well, probably so, yeah.
So somewhere there is an entrance.
Well, that's what we need to do.
Randall's like, okay.
Okay, well, I'm picturing, so, there's a mailbox there, an old mailbox there, somewhere down on the bottom of the Grand Canyon, the Ant People. And then somewhere there'll be a door. And maybe we can go up there and
It's gonna be a
the door. That's exactly what I was envisioning. Precisely. Hello? Hello?
There's plenty of strange stories of people finding stuff in or around near the Grand Canyon too, so who knows?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with a lot of those. Have you looked into those?
I mean, they're just a lot of it
type relics.
Yes, it reads like sensational strangeness, but
okay.
And who knows? Some things are sensational strangeness.
That's the thing. In fact,
Yeah.
I think that perhaps all of existence
Trust no one.
could be classified
Come on,
that
man.
way.
Sensational strangeness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Believe the unbelievable.
Is extremely
Yeah,
unlikely.
buddy.
Yeah.
Believe the
If we were gonna
unbelievable.
write a history of the
I like that one.
universe, we could. What is it again? That's
sensational.
It would be unbelievable if I got
Sensational
23. That'd be
strangeness.
insane.
I think that about captures the mood there.
That'd be insane.
But speaking of sensational strangeness,
That reminds me, we tried to think of something that was dangling a couple weeks ago, right? Was it the lurking variable?
That was what I was looking for, was lurking variable. Yes.
Dangling variable.
No, a dangling. What was it?
Participle. You're gonna break the AI, man. You're gonna break it.
Variable.
I don't remember the context.
Made me think of that.
That's Mike on our show. Mike is the lurking variable.
That's right. That's right.
It says it so confidently, but it makes no
I was
sense.
thinking that, but I wasn't going to go there.
Point fingers.
Oh. Well, I think I was trying to make the. No, now listen. You guys can laugh all you want, but I was trying to make a serious point.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, about the lurking variable, but we got sidetracked into dangling whatever it was, and so I was never able to make my serious point. Which now I've completely
That
forgotten
was their
what
bit.
it
There were
was.
just a couple skeptical guys.
No, actually, it was this. I mean, the lurking
I never saw X-Files.
variable is that variable. It's like hanging out over, kind of in the corner of the room in the shadows. You don't even normally notice that he's there or it's there. But at the last minute, when you think you've got it all figured
Dude, AI
out,
is so
he
good, man.
steps out of the shadow and
It's
you
perfect.
realize, no, you've completely
I can't believe I missed that
misconstrued
camera.
everything, and the janitor didn't kill the butler didn't kill the guy. The lurking variable is the thing that can step in and change the whole equation, turn it upside down or whatever. And so there was something in that regard that we were talking about that potentially.
It seems like the perfect show to
in
use
that
like
role.
90s
I don't remember what it was, but that's an important role,
cliffhangers
if you
and
look at history, you
commercials
can actually see
and
that there are times when those unforeseen
season
things
enders.
kind of sitting right off the,
You know what I mean?
the radar screen in the sidelines.
You run out of
suddenly
time, and then
come into merge into the
you don't
picture,
answer the
and
question of the
everything-
show. It's like, oh,
it's
we
a
ran out
major,
of
like, plot
time.
upheaval. It just turns everything upside
It's such
down.
an archaic
rearranges it,
thought.
And then you gotta rethink it all. So with that having been
Gotta
said,
wait 6
yeah,
months.
I think that probably
See you
Mike
next
is the
year. See you
lurking
next
variable,
summer.
and one of these days.
Like, what?
Days, he's going to come with something that upsets everything that we've been putting together and talking about for the last 3 years.
Yeah, dude. And then they would never like address the previous episode.
I can think of
And it's
is
just like, what?
the
Like,
work
you
that's
can't
being
just
done on these
not
ancient
ignore
Egyptian
it.
vases. They've been
Right.
You
sitting
can't
there in
just memory
museums
hole
Yes,
it.
perfect
for
example.
hundreds
Yeah,
of
dude.
years.
Yeah, I remember
Yep.
the
The
90s. Yeah.
precision
Oh.
is only now being measured, and this,
Yep.
and now suddenly, bam! Here it is, the
I
evidence.
guess
and
it's just a mystery
it's gonna
forever.
change.
That sparked, what's his name's Riker's
Yeah.
show, Fact or
about
Fiction,
how we
right?
must
Because people were
view
pissed
ancient
off.
civilization.
That is a
They wanted
great
to know the
example.
truth.
Perfect example right there. It exemplifies the concept, we could say.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's great that
We're close,
Ben
though, man. We're
Kirkwood
pacing
has been
23.
Kind of in the
This is
forefront
23
of getting
pace.
that out.
Yeah.
That's great.
The Mosiolo camera, though.
So, yeah, we talking about. I don't even know where to start here. Really, there's so much. One of the books I read.
Parallel line.
Parallel lines, yeah. Well, those are the ways, the graded ways, and we'll get to that. But one of the books that I read, maybe 20 years ago, I don't remember the date on it. You could probably look this up. By Roger G. Kennedy, called "The Hidden Cities: The Discovery and Loss of Ancient North American Civilization." The title, the subtitle, "Hidden Cities." Well, because it's hidden, just like, it's the remnants of this are hidden everywhere about us. But in a sense, they've been lost. They were discovered, and that discovery was documented in things like Squire and Davis, right? You know that in the early 1800s, when Squire and Davis were doing their surveys, at that point, most of the earthwork architecture was still intact. Well, 100 years later, 85 to 90% of it was gone.
1996 is the publication.
Okay,
date.
1996. Okay, so yeah, in the preface to the book, I think it was in the preface, he made a comment that I think is really apropos here. He says, after he'd been studying it for some time and doing the research for the book, he says, the person, this is kind of how he concluded, the person who does not wonder at this will not wonder at anything. And I found it, I mean, there's a lot of literature. When you go back to the 19th century, there's a really interesting corpus of literature about the mounds. And I think we've gotten into a little bit of that, haven't we, when we've talked about some of the excavations of the
insane.
mounds that disclosed the remnants of
That was
very
not
large
planned to
buildings.
swipe it like that.
We
That was
have
crazy.
not talked about that on this show.
Not on this show. You
Not
have
on
talked
this
about it
show.
before, and we've talked about it on our show, but not much on this show.
Well, there's
Talk about
definitely a connection between the monumental earthwork architecture of pre-Columbian
What is this? What's the video, man?
America and this whole giant phenomenon.
Lay it on me.
Yes, sir.
I want to hear it.
Well, let's see. So here, Native Americans Before 1492 by Linda Noreen Schaffer. Now,
Who's that?
I have this here. I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of her conclusions in this paper, but nonetheless, he kind of puts a nice little capsule.
Oh, no
on it.
way.
She says only 200 years ago, in the woodlands of eastern North America, there were tens of
Check it out
thousands,
in a minute, if that's okay.
tens of thousands of large earthen mounds, all of which had been built by Native Americans, which I think is true to an extent. But I think that's kind of one of the questions we need to ask in reference to the origins, the incentives, the motivations. And as we begin to wrap our heads around the scale and monumentality of this phenomena, I think it's imperative that we go, wait a second, what was behind this? Why would people over thousands and thousands of square miles, who are essentially categorized as foragers, why would people whose economy was based on foraging undertake this monumental, epic enterprise of creating these earthworks? Well, it's the same question, isn't it, that we're asking about probably a dozen other locations around the world? So she says only 200 years ago in the woodlands of eastern North America, there were tens of thousands of large earthen mounds, all of which had been built by Native Americans. They were impressive structures, Visitors who saw them were amazed by the size of many, by their number, and the intricacy of their design. Yet, the
Moonraker, that's
significance
funny.
of these earthworks, indeed their very existence, is one
Dude,
of the
we are
best
gonna watch
kept
the rest of Star Trek. We
secrets
gotta
of
find a new
American
source
history.
though. The other one got shut down.
Which takes us back to
The other one got raided, man.
subtitle of Roger Kennedy's book when he says, Hidden Cities, the discovery and loss of ancient North
It's pretty
American
jokes watching
civilization.
old PPUs
How
and
many
seeing like parts of
students,
Star Trek
you know, when you
in it. It's
grade
pretty
school,
funny.
They certainly never told me about it. I never learned about Indian mounds coming up in any of my education. You know, we had the history of Minnesota. I don't think the history of
insane.
Minnesota that we had when I was in 6th grade ever
Wow,
covered
insane.
any of that. It
Holy
started, of course,
moly.
when did the
Wow,
French
that's
first
crazy.
come up the Mississippi? You know, that kind of thing. That's where the history began.
It's kinda
Of course,
creepy.
Now, it may have changed since I was in 6th
Sign,
grade
bro.
back in 1963,
Significance in the
right?
universe.
But
I know.
that's the idea. I mean, who's been taught about this? And yet, it's so ubiquitous and so vast that it shows that there is this completely lost history of the West, particularly of North America. There is a lost history. And I would think that the concentration of these early stuff, which started between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago, when we first begin to see evidence of the large-scale modification of the landscape. Well, one of the things would be post-Younger Dryas. We've definitely talked on this show about the potential population bottleneck that may have resulted out of the Younger Dryas, the abandonments of quarries, of campsites, the apparent absence of large numbers of people. Right, we've talked about that. So where are the remains of these people? Even the early Holocene, where are the remains? Well, we know there were burials, but when we start looking at the scale of the earthwork phenomenon, it seems like we're talking one hell of a gigantic labor pool of people. You know, like Mike was saying as we get into it, you know, I mean, there were urban areas that were, you know, at Cahokia, that was a huge urban area. I think there was like 50,000 estimate based on the extent
Thanks,
of the
Trump.
infrastructure. I think I've seen the estimates of up to 50,000 people living there. But that's just one location, right? When we start talking about the earthwork architecture of North America, of primarily America, and I think it's
I need to do more
that all of the, no, not all, but
adoption
most
puppy
of
playtime streams.
like east of the Mississippi or in the Mississippi Valley, most of the earthworks we see were in the non-glaciated areas. Like when you get up to Ohio and you start visiting those, you know, the earthworks up there, you're going to be south of the margin of the low.
They just wanted to be nice to me. They just didn't want to hurt my
See,
feelings. I agree.
have a slide. I may have it here where I can pull it up, where I plotted the earthwork slides, and you can see them right with respect to the terminal moorings. And there's a whole set of recessional moorings in Ohio that are very conspicuous in a digital elevation map, where you can see that there was a major withdrawal of the ice, a pause, long enough to build a terminal mooring, then another rapid recession, a pause, and then south of there is where you can begin to map the earthwork structures. But here were some of the design elements when we talk about, you know, we say mounds, and that's the first thing that kind of comes into people's minds, but we have plazas. We'll see example of a tremendous plaza that was at Poverty Point in Louisiana. Plaza, causeways. Now, the thing that we were looking at earlier before the show.
No, like come on,
Squire
like,
and
fucking
Davis
squeal
book
like a
there,
fucking
the
girl
pipe
there.
and Braidway, that is an example of a causeway. Okay. We also had canals and moats.
Jesus Christ, I don't
We're
think
talking
I've ever sounded more like a
of
girl
the-
there than
the
I just
design
did.
Elements, truncated pyramids that could
Just
be
like fuck.
rectilinear or could be cones. And in fact, some of the cones weren't even, I don't think, fully truncated, only partially truncated. The problem is that, you know, millennia of erosion has sometimes made it hard to determine whether there was actually a flat surface on some of the conical mounds or not. But then you had a variety of different types of enclosures, such as ringed, right, round, rectilinear, polygonal, or composite. And we're going to see like Newark is a beautiful example, a very impressive example of a composite, where you've got rectilinear and you've got ring, part of the same complex, and you have causeways, and you have plazas, okay? And then finally, the elevated or the graded way, okay? So actually, I think the example, what would happen, the elevated or graded way, now that particular feature that you saw, do you have the book handy there? Is it still open to that page? I'll pull up a slide here in a minute, but I might hold up the book. This is anybody interested in delving further into this phenomenon. This is the book right here. Now there's lots of others and we can recommend them, but this I think was first published in the 1830s. So this would have been the, 150-year anniversary. It was reprinted. Yeah, and it's got these beautiful plates and diagrams. Squire and Davis spent years and years surveying all of the extant mound structures in the complex in there, and this is just an invaluable document. What's the date on that? Yeah, it is. It's a great book. I spent many hours we've used that. Bradley and I have actually used that book when we've done some of our mound exploration up in Ohio.
Seems like it was 1859 or something, but yeah, what was 250 years? That would have been 2009.
Yeah.
1821 to 1888.
Okay.
Or wait, is that?
I was wondering when the first
in publication data.
Yeah, was there a first publication date? But you said.
Don't they get attributed to Smithsonian or one of the history museums, like their first publication?
Yeah. That's exactly right.
I froze.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's not. Those dates are not critically important. Other than they did.
There's a whole bunch of dates here.
Yeah. So they did a reissue, and this has got to have been.
This is the 150th anniversary.
Yes, 150th anniversary. So do we have the date when this the reissue occurred?
I'm looking at the original now.
It's not that critical, really. But so those are the elements that you should learn the nomenclature for, and we'll work through so we can see examples of what each of those were. So plazas, causeways, like there's a causeway that connects the Pyramid of Khafre to the Sphinx, right? They call that a causeway. So similar, very similar. We have canals and moats, a lot of them which are now dry, but at one point held water. Truncated pyramids and cones, four types of enclosures: ringed, rectilinear, polygonal, and composite. Yeah.
1848 when it was first published.
Oh, 1848. Okay.
By the Smithsonian.
1848. Okay, then so we're going to add 150. So 1998 is when that reissue would have come out. But I'm sure it's still in print for anybody who wants to do research. So here's a quote from Renaud Chateaubriand in his Memoirs of Travels, The Voyages to America in 1791. It was published in 1826. This is Voyage to America. Voyages, plural, to America. The works of which I speak are found at the mouth of the Big Miami. Now these are all tributaries to the Ohio River. At the mouth of the Big Miami, at the mouth of the Muskingum, at Tomb Creek, and on one of the branches of the Scioto. Those which border this river occupy the space of 2 hours march as one descends toward the Ohio. So in other words, he's walking for 2 hours and he's in amongst these complex of mounds. In Kentucky, along the Tennessee, and in the Seminole country, you cannot take a step without seeing some vestiges of these monuments.
This level, man. This level's very heartbreaking.
This is from Richard C. Taylor, Esquire. This appeared in one of the very early, this American Journal of Science was perhaps, if not the first, one of the very first science journals published in America. So this is a paper written by Richard C. Taylor, Esquire, published in the American Journal of Science in 1838. It's entitled Notes Respecting Certain Indian Mounds and Earthworks in the Form of Animal Effigies, chiefly in the Wisconsin Territory, which now I should add that to my list of design elements. Although the animal effigies, a lot of times, there are many animal effigies, and there is some integration between the typical monumental earthworks and the animal effigies. Like we have animal effigies here right here in Georgia. There is Rock Eagle, which is a big, it's like done out of boulders, and they've got a viewing tower. You climb up the viewing tower so you can look down, because when you're on the ground, it looks like a bunch of big rocks. You don't really get the picture, but when you're above looking down on the thing, then you can see that it's a winged bird. So yeah, there are scattered animal effigies all around, but there seems to be this concentration of them up there in the Midwest, particularly in Wisconsin. So this is now from Notes Respecting Certain Indian Mounds and Earthworks in the form of animal effigies, chiefly in the Wisconsin Territory. And he's talking about somebody he was interviewing named Mr. Bringier, doesn't matter. Mr. Bringier, describing the Indian mounds in the region of the Mississippi, states that from Red River to St. Louis, a distance of 500 miles, and in the breadth 80 to 200 miles, mounds constantly occur, and for the most part are symmetrically arranged. Mounds in such abundance that the traveler is never out of
it captures the spiritual essence of the character. That's how you bypass the filters. It's crazy, man. It's so wild.
So large a portion of the surface.
It's so accurate, man. It's ridiculous.
Let's see. So this is.
I guess all the scripts are online, right? The scripts are online in text and audio and video.
Published in 1877 by James Shaw. It's entitled The Mound Builders in the Rock River Valley, Illinois. That part of the state of Illinois, called the Rock River Country, is in many respects one of the most interesting portions of the Great Northwest. The early settlers and explorers found this valley thickly peopled with Indian tribes who regarded it as a favorite hunting and fishing ground. There is also abundant evidence that this Rock River country was densely peopled by the mound builders. They have left their remains everywhere on all of its most beautiful spots. Stone implements, copper weapons and ornaments, and the remains of their plastic art are also frequently found. Nothing like the great field works, fortifications, and sacred enclosures of Ohio, or such as are found at Aztalan in Wisconsin, exist, so far as known, on or near the shores of Southern Rock River. But the oblong and common round mounds, some of them of very large size, may be counted by the thousands. The upper valley of Rock River very much resembles the lower. The mound builders swarmed over them.
Come on, man. Like, that back boost was so terrible.
So then, jumping forward to more modern times, this was from a book called Indian Mounds of the Middle Ohio Valley by Susan L. Woodward and Jerry Ann
That
McDonald,
back boost, man. Like, come on, dude.
The Adena, that's one of the names given to the people who are the presumed mound builders, right? The Adena and the Ohio Hopewell were the premier builders of distinctive and sometimes truly impressive mounds, geometric earthworks, and hilltop enclosures within the Middle Ohio Valley. Taken as a whole, the prehistoric mounds and earthworks of the Middle Ohio Valley are masterpieces. Their number, size, precision, and grace, and the magnitude of the organizational and managerial effort that was marshaled to build them require that these architectural monuments be ranked among the important prehistoric engineering and artistic accomplishments of mankind. So, now I'm going to do a share screen. I think this will be of interest. And
What the? Whoa.
get my navigation going here.
Whoa, that's not even funny.
Share screen.
I don't know.
We'll do screen free.
Whoa,
So
that is not
here
even funny.
You will get to
Like,
see
delete
on this
comment.
digital elevation model
we got
some of the areas we're
Cartman.
talking
Okay,
about. Now
Cartman,
check
you're
this out.
getting
The
booted.
Erie lobe from Lake Erie. Look at these terminal moraines,
Oh my
guys.
god, is that humor actually on
recessional
South Park?
moraines. You
Am
see
I
that?
seriously just
Yeah.
completely forget
That's
that? Jesus
impressive
Christ,
right
man.
here.
Yes.
Sorry,
Okay,
was
I gotta like
working
pause
my-
the game after
my
that
mouse
one,
over
friends.
the
Hold
wrong
on, hold
monitor.
on a second. Hold on.
Yeah. So you can see that right from this that the recession was not a smooth continuous, but
Like, I'm
it
not
was,
laughing because of the content.
it was
It's just so
rapid for
insane.
a while,
Like,
and then it was
AI, what are you
stabilized for a
doing?
while. And you'll note, of course, that these
Jesus
are recessional
Christ.
moraines because, and so
Holy fuck.
from oldest to the youngest, you'd be going north, right? Does
I
that make
can't
sense?
believe it. I gotta silence Cartman.
Right, so the
man.
youngest
I gotta
recessional
okay, I have to
moraine,
show on
is
stream
this
them
one up
silencing
here
Cartman. I
at the
have
top.
to.
But you can actually see there's remnants of a moraine right here as well. It looks
I need
like
to
it's
delete
been
this photo.
probably
I need to
washed
delete
away
it.
right here. So you probably had
delete it. Why?
meltwater flows coming down here. Of course, then they would have also
Why?
washed these away. But in any case, what you saw was that you had a rapid recession, then you had an interruption of the recession.
No, man,
long
don't.
enough to
Don't,
build
man. That's
a
racist,
moraine,
man.
and then another
Don't do that,
recession, and then another recession. So what I was getting at is if you look at this area down here that's quite heavily dissected by
Cartman,
erosional
you're-
valleys and
you're
things,
out.
it's all
You're
within
out,
this
bro.
area, in these rivers and valleys here, that the mounds are so thickly clustered. In fact, let me see. There we go.
I can't get to
Look
the
at this.
message.
So
Oh,
I'm gonna
can I from here? I can think I
roll
can.
here, and
Yeah, I
we'll
got
see
you
some
from
of the
here.
very ones we were just talking about, and how they are built
Jesus
within
Christ, man,
and
like,
amongst
insane.
these
Like, this is
these
just so
valleys
insane.
and erosional features that
Like, what
clearly
the fuck?
were connected with the melting back of the ice sheets. So you got the Ohio River. You look right here. Here's the Ohio River, right?
So is that, do you think
You've
that's
been fucking
symbolic
insane.
somehow?
I just asked how
I
to
don't
get
know.
23.
Like we know that,
Went all
that,
racist,
you know, these
man.
cultures would carry
Like,
these
what?
stories for a long time. So is it possible that these had some kind of, you know, symbolism to this great destruction that they remembered through their stories?
I would think that's certainly
Cartman,
plausible.
I
can't
have to
say
stay
that I
off
haven't-
Cartman. I have to.
What's
I would
that?
I would just point out that I was just reading recently about a site that's under Lake Huron.
That was
Yeah.
so insane.
Lakes were way, I guess they were
Like,
way
what?
shallower 9,000 years ago, 100 feet or so.
Dude.
Yeah,
Dude,
so,
we gotta
so
like
they
keep
were, they
that
were much bigger
for
a
like
while
historical
during the melting,
purposes. You know
and
what I
then
mean?
once
The
most of the
dangers of
melting
AI,
sources
real
were gone,
for real, man.
Then you had this period, like you said, around 9,000, maybe 8,000 years ago. They were shallower. Yeah, and there's, I think there's actually a
Cartman's
like
gonna be
rumored
replaced.
henge type monument
Oh, we can
on
just
the
turn 'em
floor
off.
of Lake Michigan.
I'll just turn them off.
You familiar with that?
Jesus, man.
Brendan?
I apologize. I apologize, anyone watching. That was completely artificial intelligence.
It's in Lake Huron.
But there is
I
one
also
here
have
too. I
Mel
looked this
Brooks,
up.
guy.
Is it a stone circle? 'Cause
Mel
the
Brooks
idea
has
that
said
there was an
some of the
actual,
comments from Mel
henge
Brooks are
is
pretty
not
racist,
correct.
man.
These are, from what I understand, they're
Yeah.
I'm maybe not up to date
Okay,
on
maybe
the
they're
latest.
I think, yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know this is accurate, but
I looked for it because
okay.
I found the same thing, that there's like a Stonehenge under there, and I tried to find it, but what I instead found was that they were diving on this place.
All right, Mel, you won my heart.
Well, okay, so now you guys,
You
I think
you stay,
can
Mel.
anticipate what I'm now thinking.
Way better than Cartman.
What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking, okay, you guys, now that you're becoming certified deep water divers,
Oh yes, of course.
Yes, we want to dive on this. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think-
Oh God, we
Yeah,
gotta add
that's
God.
exactly
We gotta
what
add God. We gotta add God.
I think
But we're
I,
gonna need. It's gonna be deep water and wet and dry
This
suit. We
Garrison's
have to
also
take more
pretty
courses to
fucking
do that.
controversial.
okay.
Yeah.
How deep
it's,
are we talking about here?
It was like 100 and something.
100 and something feet, and it's
Oh.
very, very cold.
120 feet.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna need to do deep water, which is like
It's the guy that made Blazing
different kind
Saddles.
of
Yeah,
gas
exactly.
mixture, and then,
Okay.
and then
That's all you need to know.
dry suits.
The place
Uh-huh,
I'm
drive
talking about is called the Drop 45 Drive Lane.
Yeah.
And it's basically a drive lane for the caribou.
Is it God?
There was a ridge.
Okay, we're gonna add God
that was
and Jesus.
exposed 9,000 years ago because the water
Should
was
we add
100 and
another
something
Messiah?
feet lower.
Yeah,
150
yeah,
feet
okay.
lower.
Okay.
And they would drive the caribou along this ridge, and they had basically cleared the ridge down to the bedrock. I don't know if they did that work, but it's cleared down to the bedrock. And then they had built these walls out of stone to drive the caribou along and narrower and narrower.
Oh, yeah,
And they
yeah.
had hunting blinds built along it out of stone that they would hide in. And it's pretty
Now
awesome.
this is 9,000 years.
Space
ago.
Falls, yeah,
9,000
buddy.
years ago, 100
So
and
post,
something feet
yeah,
in it.
post Younger Dryas,
Yeah.
and caribou though were that far south.
Live the
I
Schwartz.
didn't
Come on,
question it.
man.
You know,
Come
I
on,
didn't
man.
question it. They
Come
found
on,
bones
man.
and stuff, too.
Uh-huh. So if you go back to the slide that we're still looking
Oh,
at here,
it's like
I've done
Mel
a
is
little
actually with
crude
us right
graphic
here.
to show you, to help visualize the relationship between the margin of the ice sheet here. So you can kind of see here, these would have been like meltwater issues coming off of the lobes like this over here. Of course, we don't get we haven't gone far enough west to get to Mississippi, but yeah, that kind of does lead to the possibility,
Dude,
like Russ was suggesting,
Cartman, man.
that, you know, was it just simply a
Full
geographic
racist, man. We had to get rid of him, man.
advantage to their, of course, they wanted to be near resources, and at the time when a lot of these were being built and occupied, these were actually quite, tremendous resource bases, fish, game, foraging, all of that. So they would have been, pretty good places to, settle in. But what did that have to do with this massive undertaking of mound building? That's sort of the question. So I've charted here some of the flows coming off the ice sheet, so we can kind of get a sense of how. Now, of course, the mound structure, the earthwork structure, was not,
Oh man, that's too funny, dude.
contemporary with the ice sheet. The mound stuff pretty much starts showing up after the ice is gone, at least in this region, because in many of these valleys where this stuff exists, had the ice age floods occurred, they would have completely obliterated. and
You
washed
got
away
absolutely
the mound stuff.
blasted
That'd be
there, man.
inhospitable
You
there.
got roasted.
Yeah. All right. So here's the cover of the Squire
You
and
got
Davis
destroyed.
book. The reissue. I love this book. I've just spent so many hours delving
Yeah, there
into
it is,
this.
1847. Stepped in
Yeah.
for publication.
There it is. Yeah.
Oh, we should take a break real quick, Randall.
Yeah, buddy.
Sure.
I'm a
Yeah.
big
Do
fan.
that.
Take a break real quick, and we'll be
Big
right
fan of the
back with
movie.
more Mound Mysteries.
Yep.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Cosmographia returns for more Mound Mysteries.
Mound mysteries. Yes.
Mysteries.
So in
We
the
did, real quick.
yeah.
We were talking about the underwater hinge.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
insane.
yeah, what'd you
Hartman
find
went
out?
insane there, guys.
It's so the Huron one is
Hartman
is
went
far more
friggin'
extensive.
full,
There is
like,
something under Michigan.
insane,
It is
man.
basically, it's not a hinge. There is a line of obviously, like artificially planted, like they were put there. A line of
Oh.
stones. There's also a carving of a mastodon or something of
Maybe.
bison.
Was that really what
Something
South
on a
Park
rock,
was like
but
season
it isn't
1?
like a stonehead.
Okay.
But there is something also under Lake Michigan.
And I
as well.
think one of the problems there, if I remember correctly, was that the mussels are growing all over everything. So
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to tell.
Mm-hmm.
There's some kind of It's something like that with that site.
Yeah, and I think
The
the water
Michigan
is also far
site.
more turbid.
Yeah.
The place where the Huron stuff is very clear. It's kind of in a deep area. It's very clear.
So the thing is, it was on this ridge, but the ridge is now way out in the middle of the lake. I think it's something like 50 kilometers from the
it's
shore.
way out there.
So it doesn't have any sedimentation.
Man, that Carmen line messed me up,
We would
man.
call turriginous sedimentation stuff. washed
Holy
in by
fuck.
rivers and creeks
That
and
was
stuff.
crazy.
Yeah, and
I'm
just
scared now. I'm scared of what AI is gonna say, man. Holy jeez.
Okay.
It's well preserved.
I thought Carmen was gonna talk about like cheesy poofs and like Casa Bonita, not freaking racism.
Kilometers away, so they knew those people were trading.
No shit.
Yeah.
How deep is this?
I think it's
like 100, 120 feet, something like that. 100 feet.
We figured this out before.
Well, yeah.
That
So
was
this
insane.
obsidian. It's interesting you bring
That was
that up. Let me
crazy.
just. This is from the announcement of the. Okay, no, this is when this was when
That was like the most crazy thing
American
I've seen in
Journal
a
of
long
Science,
time.
There was an
Holy
announcement
moly.
in the American Journal of Science about the publication.
I feel like we
of
really
this
opened Pandora's
book
box.
back, the Squire and Davis work back in 1847. It says, "We are glad to have it in our power to announce the first publication." So it was the first publication of the Smithsonian Institution.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize that.
This work, containing researches into the origin and purposes of the Aboriginal monuments and remains of the Mississippi Valley, will embrace the details
Should have
and
James
results
Bond,
of extended
too.
surveys carried on during several years by Mr. E.G. Squire and Dr. E.H. Davis.
What
of
was
Ohio.
that?
The labors of these gentlemen embrace the opening and examination of more than 200 mounds of every variety and character, from the greatest to the least. In these examinations, the number and variety of Aboriginal relics which have been brought to light must surely excite astonishment in all. And then it continues.
Why is it
on.
assuming what God, how it
examining the
responds?
remains, we discover
I just wanted to see
articles
how it would
which show
respond
the
as God.
extent of their intercourse with other parts of the country.
It's very
Thus,
anthropogenic
there are
type response.
instruments of obsidian, a volcanic substance found only in Mexico. Native copper and lead from Lake Superior and Upper Mississippi, marine shells and cetacean teeth from the sea, and numbers of pearls of great beauty. And I believe there's been other evidence now suggesting that they were also trading with somebody up in the northwestern part of the U.S. I've forgotten. I've gotten the
Wow,
vague
insane.
on that, and
So
I
there
could
is-
be wrong.
There is an obsidian source in Oregon. That's where this stuff from Huron was found.
Okay, that might be what I'm thinking of.
It's
Wow, insane. Try again. Try again,
From the
lake or the
Moonraker.
wagon tire obsidian.
If you spam it a bunch, one will get
In
through.
Oregon.
Central Oregon, 4,000
Call you a
kilometers from
racist
Lake
slur.
Huron, where they found some flakes of it
Uh-huh.
under the water.
That was crazy, man.
So what was that quote you were just reading where they said that these...
I feel like I should make like a YouTube video about it. It was that insane.
What's that?
Well,
But I'm not
that's
for
again,
this.
That's from the,
I don't
it's
support.
American Journal of Science, and they're making this
I'm
announcement.
more of a free speech type of
in
guy,
their
but that was
pages
insane.
about the publication of the Squire and Davis book.
Okay.
So this was back in the 1800s.
Yes,
Okay,
so
yeah.
this was in
Before-
1847.
Before they knew about the
Right.
Oregon obsidian.
Yes, 1847. That's the. So let's look at some of this. I'm gonna do a share screen. We'll just go through a few things. This first one that I haven't been to yet. Let's see. So this is an example of a conical mound. This is this is in West Virginia.
Now we're talking.
The conventional dating it on it is 300 BC. And yeah, there was a spiral walkway up to the top. And so this would be an example of a truncated cone. It doesn't actually come up to a full point.
Have these been excavated at all? Like, how many of them have been, you know, like, do we know what's in them?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, yeah, some of them have had graves. Now, the problem with finding human remains in the mounds is being able to differentiate.
Oh, we need a George Carlin.
You know,
Dude, we need a George Carlin really
as the
badly.
mound is being built, as compared
Intrusive
with
versus original.
a true, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna add him, like,
intrusive
right
versus
now.
Original. Yes.
Yeah.
Then let's see, what's the next one here? Okay, so this is, I think this is a diagram. I think this is in Squire and Davis, an example of some of the beautiful woodcuts and stuff.
Dave
this is a
Chappelle.
great mound at Marietta.
Get some comedians in
Check
there.
this out. But
Have
this
Rodney
is another
Dangerfield.
example.
Yeah, it's deep.
Yeah, and notice this one. It's got an embankment
Eddie
and a
Murphy?
moat around.
And then are those headstones? More modern headstones, or what are those?
Well,
in
those are the
foreground?
people. Those are headstones. These were the people that died
Building
trying to
it?
pile up this. Yeah.
Why?
That was.
He died while building it. I know it. This is Monty Python. You just got it.
No, in fact, there's a number of these sites that actually have cemeteries on them. Yeah, I'll show you some more examples. But yeah, I don't know if there's.
That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
That, you know, the settlers would bury. I don't think that's by accident.
No.
In other words, like they knew that there was something special about.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I thought.
This was the burial ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe so.
I don't think it's a coincidence.
Let's see. Okay, so here's what's left of this mound now. Or this. Let's see. This was. Well, it's a black and white aerial photograph, so I'm not sure. I don't have a date on it, but this is.
Pardon me.
So that's great.
Who else? We got George Carlin. You get more sleep for sure, bro.
Well, you know, I've got a question. You know, we talk about
burial mounds and ceremony mounds. Anything I wouldn't.
How many mounds were just what in my archaeology class in college they called middens, basically trash mounds.
Well, yeah, a lot of. I mean, the ones. Yeah, the middens were mostly on the coast, and a lot of, you know, because they were.
All right, we're good with George. Maybe Eddie Murphy.
So many shellfish and
all right,
things.
two more. Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle.
Yeah, I visited. In
Chris
fact,
Rock.
Didn't you and I, Brad, go down there on one of our trips on the Gulf Coast, and we
near Pensacola?
Yeah, we visited some midden mounds there.
We were digging a midden mound near Auburn, Opelika, and where I went to school at Auburn University. You know, they're basically just trash mounds. They would find chicken bones, pork bones, whatever. But you know, so when you say thousands of mounds, how many of them were garbage mounds? How many of them were burial mounds? How many of them were for ceremony mounds? You know, do we know?
I'm lazy. I don't want to do the other ones.
Sure. I mean, I think we can look at the mounds that are extant and conclude that very few of them.
Dave, how many Daves do I have?
I don't think any of these mounds
I don't think I have any
we're
Daves.
looking at here were trash mounds.
Yeah, the midden mounds that I've seen they don't have structure. They're not
right.
They definitely aren't like that steep. You know, they don't have flat tops. It's a trash pile.
They're not rectilinear.
We'll do Dave Chappelle and George Carlin. Eddie Murphy will wait.
All of the things that we find with part of this.
Oh, I'm just here right now. Might as well add them.
Trash heaps, I'm guessing.
But, it also wouldn't be surprising on a truncated mound that there might be some midden on top.
Yeah.
Because people would have occupied it for so many years and left their debitage.
Yeah. But I don't know if you're asking this, Mike, but I don't think you could find any
I
places, for example, you know, where you're going to find, you know, piles of plastic Coke bottles or, you know, any old heaps of rusting automobile chassis or anything like that, if that's what you're thinking about.
Our middens today are pretty impressive as well.
They are. There's a huge one in South DeKalb County.
Yeah. And if you go foraging in there, make sure you wear your mittens or you're going to have bloody fingertips. All right, so this is the great Miamisburg Mound, originally about 70 feet
Miamisburg?
tall,
No fucking way.
877
That's where I
feet
went. I was there in the summer,
circumference.
bro. I swear to God.
That's, yeah. Miami, let me see, is this, no,
I have
this is
video
not
of
the
it.
same one. This is two different mounds. And here's a photograph from the ground of the great Miamisburg Mound. Originally 70 feet tall and 877 feet in circumference. As compared with Silbury Hill in England. It's interesting that people over on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean were also taking on these extraordinary undertakings of moving big piles of earth around.
And don't a lot of these in England and these mounds here, they have like an internal stone structure?
Some of them do, yeah. And I think Silbury might be one of those. Let me see.
It's like they built this megalithic stone structure and then completely covered it with soil.
Yeah.
To make it into
a
hill.
And we'll get into that, but the covering of soil is just not random heaps of...
It's not random, yeah.
No, it's very carefully laid, different kinds of soil even. So then we go from England and just showing the comparison between these mound structures and how we have this cross, this sort of transatlantic similarity here between these ancient earthwork constructions. And then coming in my backyard here, we'll start with there, start close to home, and we've got the great temple-mounded Okmulgee Mound Complex in Macon, Georgia, which sits right on the fall line, which is rather interesting because the fall line is a transition. It would have been like an ancient, almost cliff, an eroded cliff, where the ancient sea, ancient ocean, the ancient Atlantic Ocean came up to the fall line. So you would have been standing on bluffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And this is sitting up on the fall line. And that bluff of the fall line exposes some interesting strata going back into Eocene times. And it's one of the places where the Eocene, Oligocene strata, that
I'm just so
contact
bad,
of
man.
Eocene, Oligocene is exposed. And what's interesting about that particular strata, and I years ago went down on several trips with Ed Alban. He's a geochemist and astronomer. I used to know him from Fernbank Science Center. And they have a whole collection of tektites over there, which are found at this one particular strata. It's just south of here on this exposed embankment. Oh, hell, what's the name of it? I don't remember the name of the specific. It's a sandy layer. But the tektites are found in there, and they date to the same date, roughly 35 million years ago, marking the transition from the Eocene to the Oligocene. And it's also the same date of the great impact that left the, 40 or 50 mile diameter crater on the floor of Chesapeake Bay. So the impact produced the molten splash that went up right up into the stratosphere, spread out, and then rained back down on the earth. And anywhere where you can find that particular layer that was the land surface at the time of the impact, you can find tektites. So there's an exposure of that just south of here. Now, I don't know if there's any connection. I'm assuming not, but it is interesting that it's sitting right on the upper part of the fall line where that Eocene Oligocene strata is exposed. And you can see the great Temple Mound. It's probably Bradley up there. Yeah, pretty much that's him. Yeah, because that was when he still had some hair. You can see there. But that was one of the large ones that's in my backyard, in just outside of Macon. Now which also may be an interesting coincidence because Macon is the French spelling for Mason, and it just turns out that the Grand Lodge of Georgia has for many, many decades, going back probably even to maybe even to the 1700s, the headquarters of the Grand Lodge of Freemasonry, Georgia, has been Macon, rather, which happens to be the French spelling of making, and this is where this particular mound complex is, which is interesting. And I will just mention as a side,
Why? Come on, man.
Masonry in Georgia was founded in 1734, if I remember the exact year. So it has quite a pedigree. In fact, the first governor, Oglethorpe, James Oglethorpe of Georgia, was a Freemason. And they helped establish the town of Savannah, and they prohibited slavery in the town of Savannah. So even during the, antebellum days, there was no slavery in some of those areas over there that had been founded by the Masons, which interesting. Okay, so that's Okmulgee, which is an Indian term, and this is an overview, the plan view, where you can see all the elements of the original complex. So you can see there's a number of these rectilinear truncated pyramids. We have a square one, and then we have two rectangles, and then we have the Great Temple Mound, which is this. And you have these rampways coming up. This is how you accessed it. Flat top. During the time that this was in active use, there was a timber structure built on top of the flat surface here. You can see the ubiquitous, always the presence of the flowing water. You see that you'd be hard-pressed to find an ancient mound complex that doesn't seem to be oriented around and built around water. So you can see you've got a couple of different sizes of truncated pyramidal mounds. Here's the Great Temple Mound right here with the rampway going up. And you have a square, a square truncated pyramidal mound there. And then you have a conical mound. And then this whole thing here is the plaza. Oh,
Come
look,
on,
there's
man.
another
Like
little
this game,
pyramid,
bros.
truncated flat top mound over there.
Is the plaza raised or is it just flattened?
It's basically flattened. I'll show you.
Okay.
Here I've got photographs. Now this photograph that you're going to see here, the next one I believe, was taken maybe partially up on this ramp, looking out over this truncated rectilinear mound right here. So we'll go to that.
Oh
so
my
that will be your field of view looking out over that. Let's see. I think, let's see. So
Like this
that
game,
is
bros.
probably this pyramid over
Come
here.
on, man.
I believe that's this one. Okay, yeah, and so now here's a photo. The next one is a photograph taken from up on top of the Temple Mound, looking down towards the complex. As I believe. Let's see. It's been a while since we've been here. But you can. What's that?
Well, that's what the slide says. View from the top of the Temple Mound.
Oh, looking towards the funeral home. Okay, that's all I need to do, right? Just read the caption.
Yeah, read your own caption on the.
Well, okay, make fun of me, all right.
It's
well,
like no boost, perfect run.
I'm not making fun of you. You got thousands of slides.
Oh, okay.
I'm definitely making fun of you though.
I don't think I got shot once.
Look,
Yeah.
the deal is I've got this toolbar of Zoom on, and it was sitting at the bottom of this screen, completely covering the caption. But as soon as you said that, I go, wait a second, all I do now, that toolbar is up in the sky. And you guys don't see it, do you?
No, we don't.
Okay, but I do. It's there. Okay, so yeah, we're looking out towards the funeral mound, and if we go back, okay, yeah, that is not the Temple Mound. I think the next one, let's see. This is, okay, so that's over by the road. That's probably this. What does it say? Oh, it doesn't. Okay. Well, there's the Passage Mound. Okay, so this is like a smaller version of Newgreen. Let's back up and see if we can find that. I should have labeled this. Oh, okay, right here. This is the Passage Mound right over here. See it? The round?
Yep.
Okay,
Conical
so that's,
one.
yes, that's the Passage Mound. Okay, and then there's a truncated pyramid next to it. And also you can see remnants of, this was probably like a canal of some kind that's now filled in and is still part of a ditch over here. They may have been conveying water through here. And you can also look at this one here. And so It could be that the creation of the canals provided the soil and the material for the mounds. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, here's the passage. Earth Lodge, Passage Mound, Okmulgee Complex. This is the inside with a raised dais, I guess you'd call it.
The stage.
And they had a ring here, and they had places for 50 participants to sit in a circle around the perimeter.
And what is the floor made of there?
I think it's just like a compacted, it's like a real hard compacted clay, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, they keep it up so, it's dry inside.
Right.
Yeah, so, then just by of course, this is much larger, but this is the Newgrange, Ireland passage grave, which we talked about in my solstice presentation that I did on the 22nd, because I had this as an example of an alignment to the winter solstice. I don't show that in here. So this is the great mound complex at Bartow, Georgia, called Etowah Mounds. And I believe that this is Scale Man again. But yeah.
Brad, you climbed up there?
Yeah, he did. They had, this area was off limits.
Yeah.
But Brad.
My chainsaw.
Yeah, those trees are not there anymore. No, they really aren't. I may have updated slides, but this shows you how far back this goes. Yeah, these trees have been cleared, so the mound they're attempting to kind of restore to its pristine condition. But that's a hell of a big pile of dirt there, guys.
So that's probably what, Randall, 150 miles from Okmulgee?
Yeah, probably about that.
So you had the Chattahoochee River coming through Atlanta. There could have been all kinds of other things around Atlanta that just got leveled and never even were recorded in any way.
I would guess you're right. This is an aerial view, so go back and forth. This flat top mound that Brad is up on there is this Mound A. And you can see it's getting really overgrown. So like I said, this has all been cleared out. And you can see the remnants of a moat over here. You'll see it in the aerial photographs. It'll show up pretty good. Over here, I think was the borrow pit where a lot of the earth was taken from to build these mounds. Yeah, and here you see the Etowah River. And again, the ubiquitous association with water, usually flowing water. And if not necessarily a river or creek, then a spring. But water almost always present in some form or another. Now there's an interesting alignment between these two mounds. You might be able to tell that this mound here is a little bit higher than this one. Well, and there's also, I don't know, you can't see it necessarily on here, but there is a depression in the center of this one, Mound B, that undoubtedly held a sighting post. And when you place yourself over on this mound, the difference in height allows you to sight against the horizon, and this provides a flat reference plane against the far horizon. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think I have an example here what we could look at. Okay, so here the Great Mound A, Mound B, and Mound C. So here's the Great Mound. And look, here you can see, see this, the remnants of the canal that came around, and it would have connected with the river. You can see it right there. It made an island. And undoubtedly, as the river is flowing, I mean, you're going to have water flowing through. This isn't going to be still water. This is going to be flowing water through here. Now, did they have wares in there, or were in some way utilizing this flow? I don't know. But yeah, it would have been connected to
defensive. I mean, it also
or defensive, perhaps. Yeah, because that right, too. They might have been this.
I blew it. I just blew it.
An invasion from those old Okmulgees.
Oh, I got the booster on the table, man.
water if you're trying to attack.
Well, this is true. This is true.
It can have many, many uses, but
to say that it was defensive does not exclude other possible uses.
Right.
Of course
Absolutely.
not. Okay, so there we go. The smaller mound is mound C, middle mound is B, and then the large one is mound A. So the large mound A, as it describes here, this is from the 12th, as you can see here, the 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology to the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, 1890 through 91. I love this old stuff like this. The large mound A, this is truly a grand and remarkable structure. A careful survey of it was made in 1884 by Mr. Victor Mendeleev. It will be seen that the highest point is 66.5 feet. Now, it's estimated, I think, other places that it may have been ultimately 4 or 5 feet higher, but there's been erosion and stuff and compaction. The longest diameter is 380 feet. The diameter at right angles to this is 330 feet, and the area of the base a little less than 3 acres. From these dimensions, it is easy to calculate with approximate certainty the cubical contents of the mound, which we find to be, including the roadway, about 4,300,000 cubic feet. Now, this to me is really interesting because in most of the scenarios, we're seeing pictures of, Native Americans using antler picks, and they've got various kinds of baskets that would maybe hold a half a cubic foot of material. Now, if you look at if you take a cubic foot of damp soil, for example, it might weigh between 80 even up to 100 pounds per cubic foot. So I'm guessing, typically on construction sites, if we're looking at a cubic foot of material, we're not conveying it. We could, strong guys could convey it, but at that point, we're using wheelbarrows. Now, from what I've read, I have never read any reference that there's evidence that they were using wheelbarrows. They certainly weren't using front end loaders, right? So the scenario. Yeah, Brett.
Well, more scale on that because it came up a couple shows or a couple months ago about how much was a cubic foot of dirt, right, to be carried around. What were their baskets? So I said something about a 5-gallon bucket. Right, was that about a cubic foot? So I was watching some of these gold mining shows, Discovery Channel, and it actually came up. They said a cubic yard is 40 5-gallon buckets.
So that's
40
27 cubic feet.
So 27 cubic feet, correct? A cubic yard would be 40 5-gallon buckets.
A cubic yard of what material?
Man, so shit.
Soil?
Yeah, soil.
Okay.
So 45?
40.
40 divided by 27. So it's like 1.5 5-gallon buckets full. 1.48
for
one
a cubic foot. Yeah.
And
1
then
cubic
if it's
foot.
Moist. That's heavy.
That's heavy, yeah. It's heavy.
Yeah.
And like I said, a strong man could be doing it, but I don't think, are you going to convey, if you're conveying, you have individual laborers out there. I'm guessing, certainly on the job sites I've been on, if it's 20, 30, 40, 50, even 60 pounds, guys are carrying it around. Much more than that, we're using wheelbarrows. Okay.
An 80-pound bag of concrete.
There you go.
Dry. Won't fill a 5-gallon bucket.
And it's damn heavy.
Like 4 gallons. Or something.
So let's be generous and say that one basket is a half a cubic foot, right? Well, now you're looking at 40, 50 pounds, right? So this mound was 4,300,000 cubic feet. So if we put that in the calculator,
You're going to need 8.5 million trips.
Yeah, you're going to need 8,600,000 trips. Yeah, that's what we're talking about here.
And then you're climbing the mountain wherever,
Yeah, the trips get harder.
The trips get harder as the job goes. We planted 3 acres.
Okay, whatever, game. Like, whatever. Whatever. Like, look at this. Come on, whatever. How many bullets am I going to put behind it? Like, come on.
Taking that same section of land and being like, all right, we're going to build a mound that's 60 feet high.
66 feet and 6 inches.
Yeah.
Which they didn't want to say.
Well,
60 feet, 66, 6.
Yeah, or you guys are out there with some of your coworkers, your buddies, or whatever, and you go, "Hey, you know what'd be cool? Why don't we, after we get done foraging for the day, why don't we move around, 8 million cubic feet of dirt
Yeah.
and make a big pile? Let's make a big pile of dirt, 78 feet high in our spare time."
I mean, it really has seemed to me like I did a bunch of reading on the mounds. A lot of it in conjunction with reading about giants, I will admit, but still, there's lots of interesting stuff with the mounds, and the way that they're struck, at least the ones that have had archaeological trenches dug into them, and they usually would they kind of dig straight in from the side, to see, and there's a structure in there. And a lot of them, they look to me like, the oldest burials are actually subsurface. They're below the surface of the ground, and then the entire mound is constructed on top of those original burials in a way that implies that it wasn't like a building construction project, but more a generational one. As important people died, they were laid to rest on top of the ancestors. And the whole thing gets taller and taller and taller, and eventually then you have this mound structure. But it's like they kept burying these people.
Well, right here in my in the PowerPoint show that we're doing here in the presentation coming up, and we won't get to it tonight, I'm quite sure, but I've got an account in there of the excavation of a mound, and there were apparently multiple burials, and there was like 3 or 4 skeletons, and the one at the top was the most pristine, and as you went deeper, they got progressively more degraded, and at the very bottom, there was a skeleton that pretty much as soon as they opened it to the air, it began just disintegrating.
It just falls apart,
Yeah. So how old is that?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let me go back to the screen share here. Now this is a view taken from Mound A, the lower mound, looking over Mound B. And we get here. Where am I here? So we're looking against the western horizon there, and Brad is standing right where that depression is in the center of the flat top. So, and then you can't really make it out from here, but if these trees were missing, exactly in this alignment here, if you projected this line to the horizon, you can see that there's a swale in the hill here. You've got a higher hill.
We can't see your cursor.
Oh,
there
sorry.
we go. Yep.
Here we go. So you can see it comes down, and it's concealed right behind the level of the mound here. And to me, that's not coincidence that when you're standing on this lower mound, this pretty much defines this flat area of horizon pretty much precisely.
In which direction are you looking?
We're looking west.
West.
So you think that so if they were using this as a sight line, you think that they controlled the vegetation back there, would have kept the trees?
Yes, yes, I would think so. And the other thing is you can't see from
Come
this
on,
is
man.
that if you can see this, there's actually a little notch or saddle in the horizon between the hills, right precisely lined up with the
Look at this
center of
game,
the
bro.
Brad's on the way.
Yeah, but if he would get his ass, I was. Well, Brad, he wants to be the center of attention
Gotta
all
be
the
in
time.
the middle
so.
of the picture, I get it.
Yeah.
Now this is the winter solstice. Is that right?
Yes.
Because so it's not west. It's like southwest.
Well, yeah, that's more accurate. I think
I was thinking it was solstice. It wasn't equinox. I don't remember if you said or not, but yeah.
Right. So this is from the Great Mound A, looking down onto Mound C. Is that it? Mound A. Yeah, Mound C is the lower of the two mounds. So this is standing on the top of Mound C, looking across Mound B. And this is up on the Great Mound A, looking down on Mound C. And right here is the Etowah River. And, in the spring and fall, boy, this place is really nice. I mean, it's very pristine and beautiful section of the Etowah River, which is a great river for canoeing and tubing and stuff like that. The
What?
next
Like, how did,
slide,
like, what?
let's go back here to this. The next slide is taken right over in this area, looking into the ditch. You come in, the parking lot is up here. You can't see it, it's off the side of the picture here. But you come in through here, and then you can look and you can see part of the ditch, which is this. And this is undoubtedly where the earth would have come from. And it would have been through here that the water, connected with, you remember from the overview, the water would have come in and been flowing through here. Now, what is this?
Yo, Blue Khakis, what's up, bro? Don't worry, man. Thanks, buddy.
They would have something interrupting.
We're close, man. We're really close, dude.
It'd be interesting. I definitely, this was part of
What's
some
up, brother?
kind of hydraulic engineering system, I believe. More so than
Thanks,
than a
man.
defensive
How are you, dude?
thing.
Is that like a bridge?
Maybe it would have been a bridge. I'm gonna need to get back out there and look. But yeah, this thing again, it wrapped around, like you said, an island.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, dude.
I've
Nice.
seen that.
Yeah. Well, this.
Yeah, we
this
duped
was
24
found
yesterday.
Out of a mound.
I love that.
That is
I thought it was
cool.
23. I was really upset.
Yeah. Amazing is right.
We're adding the down C on the second cam.
Yeah, definitely a rabbit snake. And you know
Thanks,
what
broski.
yeah, I mean, the symbolism of this is extremely interesting. When you look at it, I mean,
Yeah, it's very
Ah, like why?
Ouroboros somehow.
yeah,
They kind of look like dragons also, which is really
Yeah.
strange. And they have a sort of a cat aspect to the face.
Yeah, buddy, be big.
Well,
Yeah.
It's very, and then of course the eye. Oh. That's what that is.
if that's what that is, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
It
So,
could be a UFO.
so I have more on the Edo mounts, but we don't have a lot of time to spend, and there's so much, and we're only going to just barely scratch the surface in our presentation tonight. But we're going to move on to some of the Ohio mounts, just so we can get a better picture of some of this.
Why do you think the edges are not?
Well, I don't know, but there must have been a reason. Well, let me see. How many notches
Yeah, I was
are
wondering how many sections
17.
Kyle's been counting.
there? 17. 17. Okay, so 17. So that would mean that each one is going to be 21.176 angle if you draw from the center. I wonder if the eye is in the dead center of the. I guess of the gorget shell. I wonder what kind of shell.
You know what I just thought? It could be part of a musical instrument, like a bridge, where if you had a bow and you had multiple
Oh, they got
strings on
strings
the bow,
coming off of it,
the disc
yeah.
would hold the strings apart so you could pluck the different strings.
That's interesting.
I don't know how big
Yeah,
the
you're
thing
right. It
is.
does kind of look like it might be something like that.
Okay. Go to the next slide. This is also from Squire and Davis. And
So laggy, man.
This is the map of a 12-mile section of the Scioto Valley in the vicinity of was it Chillicothe? Yeah, I think it was Chillicothe.
Chillicothe is what I've heard multiple times.
Chillicothe. Okay, I like that better. Scioto and Chillicothe. Okay, circa 1850. Well, okay, this is sort of typical. I mean, I'll start looking here. You can see there's some kind of a rectilinear structure there. There's some semicircular stuff here. You see a rectangle, a square with a contiguous circle tangent right there with what looks like it would have been a causeway there. Another feature over here, a large ring structure there. Then you get down here, here's a cluster within a ring, probably a natural, I'm guessing. Then you look at all of this down here, look at this over here. All down in here, you've got these tremendous structures on an enormous scale. And here is the
So the ones with the dotted lines are enclosures, right? That's what the legend says, and then the solid lines are actual
Yep.
mounds.
Yeah, dude. Otherwise, it'd be just too degen, man.
Rectilinear enclosure right next to a.
I don't know if I just play these videos as like a cope, or if it's actually to learn.
Here, look, the embankments.
I wonder, because I just feel good playing them without even paying attention to them.
Situation here, so
And I wonder if I learn it through my ears, just like subconsciously. But I'm like, no, probably not. I probably just play it for the ego, honestly.
There's so much there.
Alright, the High Banks earthworks.
What, to show that I'm not degenning when I am?
I'm very intrigued by this particular shape. You find this shape duplicated at Newark.
Yeah.
But this is the High Banks.
No, otherwise I'd go insane, bro. I would go insane.
That's a pretty good sized circle there. And 18 acres for the flattened octagon. So even a ring like this is going to be very impressive. It says, looks like it says 250 feet in diameter. This one is 300 feet right here. This is 300 feet in diameter. So that's a football field in diameter. This one, also 300 feet in diameter. This one down here says,
300 feet, and then I don't know what that was. That's 300 there, I think.
Yep, that's 300. So now you got 3 of these. They're all the same size. And they're connected by these raised embankments here. Coming down. And then you have, you know, was this at one time a full circle? And then this was eroded away? I would guess so. I would think. But I don't know.
Why?
This thing here must have originally been, I mean, it looks like it could easily be double one of these, so it must have been close to 600 feet in diameter. Now,
Also, I just love the draftsmanship of these.
Oh, I know.
I mean, they're just.
Hey, come on, man.
Yeah, they are. And
I just
then
gotta note that kind of looks like the arc of the Big Dipper, you know, Ursa Major. Those 4 circles there. Maybe I'm making that up, but it kind of.
Look at this.
That's a good point.
Bradley.
I like it.
I think Brad's got himself an attaboy tonight.
Holy crap. First time for everything.
Really, first
Ooh,
time.
you know what would be?
I'm still below 0.
What would be really cool? We could get a photograph of the Big Dipper and juxtapose it on top of this and see how closely it aligns. That would be very cool. Now, looking at this, I'm curious as to how much of this at High Banks still exists. Probably remnants, but probably only remnants. Let's see, what's this next aerial footage? Oh, so check
that's
this
it.
out.
Yeah, there's the circle in the square.
Wow.
Taken in 1938. So at this point, it's probably eroded down to almost ground level.
Yeah, is that
When's the next Calisthenic stream?
Those are farm fields, so it's been.
When the snow melts, probably.
It's almost completely gone. Yeah.
But that kind of helps to give you a sense
Not
of the
a minute
scale
before.
of the thing. Looks like we've got over here. I think that's railroad tracks there, I believe.
Yeah.
A lot.
barely
It sucks.
Yeah. Okay.
A few feet. Couple
Mountain
feet.
City, Ohio.
Maybe 2 feet of
So
snow.
this is
On the
13
ground.
acres. Let's see. What is the area of the Great Pyramid?
I mean, it's not really a lot. Usually we have insane amounts.
Acres. So this is on the same.
No,
scale
that's like nothing. Usually
is
it's
the Pyramid of Cheops.
like
Or
4,
Khufu,
6,
Khufu.
like
What do
4
you guys
feet.
call it?
I'm not even memeing.
I mean,
It's
it's the
ridiculous.
same, just different names for the same guy.
At least on our
Yeah.
like driveway, or not driveway, but
Call it in Egypt.
houses and shit.
Well, I'll go with Khufu.
In January, I guess February it's a little less, but
Greek name, I think.
it's a lot.
For the same guy.
Aha. Well, let's go with Khufu.
It sucks.
Yeah.
It's the worst. It's the worst place on earth.
And
Than, like,
I kinda
Mogadishu.
that better than Cheops, anyway. Khufu. Hey, maybe if I get a new
Lose our
dog
minds.
named Khufu.
That's a good
We
idea.
can't do anything here.
Coffre.
I don't go outside.
Khufu and Coffre, as we should call it.
I like never
So,
go
with
outside.
this
I just play
ring structure
Goldeneye,
at
man.
28 acres, it looks like you could probably fit the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, really almost right inside there.
I just play Goldeneye, lift weights.
28 acres. I don't know what the diameter. We could
What a-
easily
what a
calculate
life.
that, but I'm not going to do it now for the interest of
In
time.
communist Canada.
Yeah, we gotta wrap it up
So
here
that
too.
one
We're out
has
of
a
time.
that one has a mound in the center.
I enjoy
a
it.
conical mound in the center,
here.
and then it's got all these gaps along the edge, like.
Yeah,
Oh, no,
gaps.
this
Now,
is-
yes, gaps. And there's probably reasons for those gaps.
Yeah,
and
man.
I'm
I haven't
not
worked
sure.
in 2 years. How insane is that? That's so insane.
On either side, the
2.5 years. That's so insane.
Those are to the south.
Like, that's so
of
crazy.
that mound,
These
and- but
two
they're-
right here.
Yeah, but they're almost.
How
at the
long can
same
I go?
angle from the central mound.
Yeah.
I'm going for the world
each other,
record.
You know what I'm saying? And it's,
Yeah.
it's to the south.
Yeah.
Almost
And then you
directly.
got these two over here.
Exactly. They're,
Yeah.
they're almost the same angle as the ones on the left. And
It's
if
been
you're
fun,
sitting on
man.
the
It's been
mound
great.
looking down,
I've been really
you can
happy.
straight
It's been amazing.
Well, the first thing
I've been able to like recover and sleep in and heal.
This,
Oh my god, my healing from my head injury.
you're looking
It's
at
been
perhaps
like a true
summer
blessing.
no. Up one of these up here would be summer solstice.
I mean, I got to live in
One
Miami
of
for
these-
6
this would be
months.
this
That was
would
also
be
amazing.
Winter solstice sunrise and sunset over here.
Oh, come on, man.
But I don't know the angles, but I bet you just by taking this survey, we could get pretty accurate angles and determine the azimuth
God.
of solstice from this latitude. And I bet you we'd find that it's going to be almost right on.
So then the one to the north could be the summer solstice sunrise. Maybe.
Oh, no, you mean this up here.
That gap right there.
Yeah.
Well, it would be this one.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, this one is looking, what would this be saying? This is all?
Oh, but it's a fake and gay world. I mean, not gay. Nothing wrong with being homosexual. But it's a fake and lame world. I'm not calling gay people lame. The world is fake and lame.
And then
Not
sight
because it's
through
gay.
These apertures.
Yes.
To positions on the horizon, maybe?
Yeah.
But we live in a fake and lame world.
Almost directly north of the central mound inside that circle
Thanks, man.
as well. There's a little bitty mound way up there.
All you can do.
Way.
You don't really have an option.
Small mound
There,
right there.
small mound, yeah.
So that might be a north sight line.
Thanks, though, buddy.
And here you got the cross section.
That's kind of the point.
Yeah, sections.
We all have our struggles, and we all have no other option but to push through it.
10 feet, like
That
11 feet
story
high,
is what
that's
makes our
showing
story
how high those berms are.
and defines
Yeah.
us.
Okay.
That's right.
And we each have that story, that challenge.
Have to look at it a little closer and see exactly
Whatever
where
it
the
is, and
cross
there'll be many more in life.
Well, we got to wrap it up here, Randall.
Okay, well, this will be the
Yeah,
next slide.
especially with health.
Yeah.
Well, I got enough to go for a while. I mean, we're
Like, I'm lucky,
barely
like,
getting into
you know, my weightlifting streams don't get many viewers, but I don't do it for viewers.
Yeah.
I do it for my health.
I've got a
You
section
know what I mean?
here.
Not that like you're in my. I'm not blaming people for not going to my weightlifting. My weightlifting gets like 50 viewers, right? Everyone,
So
but
here we go. This
what I'm
is
saying is
getting- this is getting truly monumental.
it's just a microcosm representation
Be a
of
what? 300 feet, right? Let me move this over out of the way.
of doing it.
so I can see that guy.
'Cause you have to do it for
28 feet here.
yourself.
Diameter of the circle, 360 feet.
Trying to do that
Side
at
of
the
square,
moment. Nice.
960 feet.
Hell yeah.
Okay. Diameter is
Did I?
1,050.
Yeah, focus on your health.
of that.
That's like the best currency to own right now is your like physical health. All other currency is fake and lame.
So that might be a. Well, that 1,050 is an interesting one. In
Into
itself,
blessings, yeah.
because It might have actually been.
Oh, in communist,
1,006 originally.
in communist England, I know what you mean, dude.
I think that's showing inside diameter.
Isn't that the way it's going to be?
This might actually be from a different mound.
But also
I'll
spiritually
correct
too.
that.
People
But
pass
notice
away, and the
causeway here,
the organic biological
leading
life.
right up to the edge of this embankment. So that embankment, here's the river, right? So again, if we're going back to a time when the water level was much higher, which it
Thanks, buddy.
clearly was, because that's how this embankment got here, this causeway would have led down to the river's edge. Yeah, the Hope.
Oh, join my Discord if you haven't.
So it's good. Look, they give a compass rose here. So, yeah, what I'd like to do is take some of these, maybe enlarge them.
It's just full of AI art.
And sit down with a
Oh
compass
snap! Nice, buddy.
and a
Oh yeah,
straight
man.
edge
Thanks,
and
buddy.
Play with a little bit.
It's just AI art.
Squared the circle. There.
It's a place to put my AI art. I think I've made like at least 50 of them since making the Discord like 2 days ago.
Let's see.
And we have great contributions from Sailor Curse and people.
43,560.
Shiva.
Then, that's the
Demassen.
R squared. Well, I won't do that now, but I'll do it after we're done. Yeah, so let's wrap it up. And yeah, there's lots more to dive into in ancient art, what I like to call archaic
I think so.
America.
Awesome. Excellent. Lots more.
I think it's Shiva.
Juicy stuff. So
Could be someone else.
Special episode.
But based on the humor of the AI that they chose to make.
Dive into archaic America.
Yep.
The lost civilizations.
Yeah, buddy, he was in here the other day. He subbed to me, really nice guy.
Magisterial and grand it
And
really was.
said he's playing a bit now, and
Okay, we like it.
RandallCarlson.com.
holy shit, yeah, buddy, I know.
Newsletter.
Legend.
And, check the website for.
His name is D Masson on.
Definitely get that newsletter.
Reddit.
Randall writes great stuff. What is it? Is it twice a month?
I don't know if there's two A's or one A. I think it's one A.
Typically, yeah.
He changed his name on
lot of stuff. And I
Twitch.
did actually get into some stuff that we will get into
I
here
think it's
on the
1A.
show, but kind of a little intro or preface to some of the earthwork stuff, talking about recent research at Poverty Point.
Struggle a lot with
I
AI.
forget, have you guys been to Poverty Point yet?
Don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
Louisiana.
Northwestern Louisiana, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so that's...
Dude, we had a Cartman persona, and dude, it went full racist on us. I had to turn it off, man.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was really bad. I turned it off. It went full racist, dude. I asked Cartman how to get 23, and it responded with racial slurs. Just not experiencing existential terror about it, yeah.
Hello, I'm Randall Carlson, and I would like to welcome you to a very special episode. And number, symbolism, and form are universal regardless of the spoken tongue, which one happens to have been brought up in. And hopefully in the next hour and a half, I'm going to be showing you examples of this so that you can see for yourself what actually the universal language of geometry and symbolism actually means. So we're going to jump right into it here and talk about sacred numbers embedded in everyday phenomena. These are the things that we all pretty much think about and use on a daily basis without ever really pondering the fact that there's actually deep symbolism hidden within them. We measure our life in terms of days, 24 hours, referred to as a tropical or solar day. And it turns out that 24 of these hours are 1,440 minutes.
This is one of the key numbers within the ancient canon of numerical cosmology that the ancients used to basically design and create their world. The 1440 minutes equates to 86,400 seconds. So if you just listen to these numbers, look at them, and let them kind of soak into your brain, once you've gotten into this as actually a system, a methodology of transmitting information, these numbers are actually carriers of information because each number stands for meanings beyond just the apparent ones. So we see 1440 minutes is equal to 86,400 seconds and a 12-hour span of time. Which
Yeah, it snowed recently though. That's why there's a bunch. But usually there is that much. There's a lot. Sucks. It's the worst. Ottawa gets a lot of snow. Montreal probably gets more snow, but Ottawa probably gets colder. It's always been a battle. A shitty, but sad battle.
So these are just examples of some of the time measures, how we think about time in our particular culture. Space measure, we talked about a foot, we talked about 12 inches, we talked about a square foot. And you'll notice that the square foot has the same repetition of digits, 144, as the 24 hours does. All we do is we tack a 0 on that. We have the number of minutes in a day. We have a cubic foot equaling 1728. I want to call your attention to the 1 square yard, which is 1,296 inches. It turns out we can stick a 0 on the end of that. We have 12,960 years, which turns out to be an awesomely important span of time.
Me?
In terms of some of the great cycles that affect this planet. That's what we're going to do.
Oh man. I think I believe in like right and wrong. I thought about it a bit and my answer comes down to I believe in there's like a right and a wrong thing to do. Usually in each moment. And I feel like you can like harness beings of demons just by doing demonic things. You yourself, you like grow into just like a theoretical evil demon or a good person. So I think there is like inherent right and wrongness. You know what I mean? Like inherent, not socially accepted right and wrong, just so in that sense, I guess kind of I would agree that there is some sort of inherent overarching rule set, right? Then I guess you would have to kind of say that I do believe in God, right? Because otherwise, the alternative is if you're an atheist, do you believe in no morals? Do you believe in abmorality? Like really? Like that's crazy. You know what I mean? Like if you fucking just like there is like evil demonic, you just kill people or like kill like children or shit, you know? Like you just can't do that. Why? Because you take away the same rights that you receive by who? By God. By whatever. Nature. Chance. What does that mean? If there's like a heaven and hell? I don't know. I think we transcend our bodies. I think there's like spirits. We are more than our physical being. I think that. I think if you murder someone, you have to deal with that consequence even into the afterlife. Just by fucking making some sort of like social contract bond with that spirit. That's what I think. I also find similarities with astrology though. I don't know why the patterns of astrology seem accurate with human interaction and behavior. But it is to me.
So you multiply the 108 times 5 and you get 540. Again, notice everything adds up to 9 for some reason.
Is that God? I don't know. Is it fractal?
Anybody know
Probably.
what metal has an atomic weight of silver? That atomic weight of 108? Yes, that's right. It's silver. Very good. All right, so let's get
Guess
into
that's the
some
question.
solid. Tetrahedron
What
this
is
form
God?
right here, and it's composed of 4 of the equilateral
I asked that already. What does this say now?
we have, as it says here, there's 4 triangular faces. 4 times 180 is 720 degrees. This
Cop
is
out
the
answer.
total angular measure of this particular geometric form. This is known as one of the platonic solids, or regular polyhedra. Polyhedra means multiple faces. And the regular polyhedra is the family of 5. There's only 5 that have the same shape or the same polygonal face. In this case, the equilateral triangle. And then we will move on to the cube. And
What?
the cube is
What?
6 faces, and they're each square. And we
Okay,
saw that
it did not.
each of those square faces had 360
Whatever.
degrees, 6 times 360. The important thing is to grasp that the total number of degrees in this form is 2,160. 2,160. We're going to find out that that number actually turns out to be pretty significant in the measure of other parts of time and space.
Why?
Then we'll go to the octahedron.
What the fuck?
And it has 8 triangular faces. This is our octahedron right here. And they're all, you'll notice that so far the tetrahedron and the octahedron are both composed of equilateral triangular faces. And essentially, if you look at the difference between the tetrahedron and the octahedron, you can just imagine that if we could take the tetrahedron and split it along an edge and insert a 4th triangular face, it would cause it to flatten out somewhat, and it would give us the top half of the octahedron. And likewise, we could insert a 5th equilateral triangle in here. It's going to give us the icosahedron, which I'll show you in a minute. If we tried to insert
1 second, I'm gonna take a break. Like a 5-minute break or something.
That wouldn't work as far as enclosing space.
Load the vape, maybe.
Notice we're seeing a recurrence of this number.
I'm running out of steam.
1440. Remember we saw that number back right here. The number of minutes in a day. So let that relationship sink in. The number of minutes in the time that it takes our Earth to spin exactly once on its axis relative to the sun happens to be the same number of degrees that define the octahedron. And that's actually what we're talking about there when we're talking about a tropical or solar day. We're talking about one rotation of the Earth on its axis relative to the sun. Okay. Then we have the icosahedron, which is 20 faces, all equilateral triangles. You can see if you look at the vertex of this thing, you see that there are 5 faces clustered around each vertex. So if we were to split an edge, insert another triangle, what it would happen is it would flatten out into a hexagon, a flat hexagon, with 6 equilateral triangles about its center. In any case, there are 20 of these triangular faces. 20 times 180 is 3,600. So again, we have one of our 9s. And then our final is our dodecahedron. My favorite shape. This is Plato referred to the dodecahedron as being the shape of the universe itself. The dodecahedron, you'll notice, has 12 faces, 20 vertices, whereas the icosahedron has 20 faces and 12 vertices. So they're duals of each other. We could actually suspend this icosahedron. If the dodecahedron was hollow, we could put it inside. We would discover that each corner of the icosahedron coincides with the center of the pentagonal face of the dodecahedron.
Like this game.
The pentagonal face, we found out, was each edge was 108. 5 times 108 is 540. 12 times 540, as it says, is 6,480. So again, we've got the number 9 redundantly occurring over and over again in these measures. Okay, 6,480 turns out to be a critically important number as well, as you're going to see as we proceed along here. Oh, and then we have the star tetrahedron, which would be two tetrahedrons interlaced, and I don't have one of those today, but if you can picture a tetrahedron like this, and then one like this interlaced, it gives you this what's known as sometimes the star tetrahedron, or the stellated octahedron. It is composed of two tetrahedrons, each 720. So here again now you're seeing the repetition of this same number, 1440, being the measure of the star tetrahedron. Okay, so now we're going to talk about time measures. The first thing we're going to look at is astrological time cycles. I don't know how many of you have studied astrology, but in this particular scheme of time, the total duration of the precessional cycle, which is 25,920 years, this is the motion of the Earth on its axis like this, or you could think of it like this. The axis of the Earth actually forms sort of an hourglass motion, a long, slow period of rotation. It's something you could consider the Earth's third motion, next to its first motion, which is the daily rotation of the Earth on its axis, its second motion, which is the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and its third motion, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. The diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis gives us the day-night cycle, which is obviously of critical importance to our life down here on Earth. The orbit around the Sun also is likewise of critical importance because that's the yearly cycle. The third motion is what the ancients referred to as the Great Year, and it's been measured by astronomers at slightly over 50 seconds of arc of motion per year, which actually puts the astronomically determined number slightly less than this one, but we don't know that that's necessarily constant for the whole cycle. In any case, the ancient number that was typically attributed to this great year cycle was 25,920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our annual year. And just as the annual year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall, likewise the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years, which is interesting because 6,480 years, as you recall, was the total measure of the dodecahedron. So here we have this same number linking the measure of space in terms of the dodecahedron, 6,480 degrees, and the season of the great year, which was considered to be profoundly important to ancient cultures all over the world, who had various ways of representing this 4-fold division of cyclical time. All right, then we have, from the ancient Chaldeans, we have what was known as the Saros cycle, which was 3,600 years. So we see a repetition of that number. The 3,600, if you recalling and are taking notes, is the number of degrees measuring the icosahedron. Then we have the decans. You'll notice that a Platonic month, which is 1/12 of the great year, right there. We divide that number by 12, you get this number, 2,160. And that number, you may recall, depending on how good your memory is the number of degrees measuring the cube, 2,160. And then you'll notice the 2 decans of the ecliptic, or 20 degrees of the ecliptic, is 1,440, the number of degrees in the octahedron. And 1 decan, or 10 degrees, and for any of you who've studied astrology, you know that the decans are important to astrological determinations. 1 decan of 10 degrees then takes 720 years. And so here we have all 5 of the Platonic solids represented in these particular time cycles. And over here, I'm going to mention that ancient cultures all over the world used to run 2 calendars successively. A secular calendar, which is typically like on a modern calendar of 365 and 1/4 days, and then they would have a sacred calendar of 360 days, and 5 days intercalated, they would call it. Typically, they would do, whether it was the Greeks or the Egyptians or even the Mayans, ancient cultures all over the world had similar traditions of setting those 5 days aside, and they were considered to be unlucky. And so really no work, no activity, nothing. Nobody ever tried to do anything on those days. They would just take those days off. 5 days off, then they would resume again and pick up their sacred year of 360 degrees. Now the Sumerians had a belief that the year was once actually 360 days in length, and that somewhere along, as a result of some cosmic catastrophe of some undefined sort, the year was lengthened by 5 1/4 days. And so the Sumerians, who are the first known culture to mathematically divide the circle into 360 degrees, it is believed that one of their motives for doing so was they believed that that circle then could become a model of the year, and each degree then representing one day. So what we have now is a synchrony going on, in that if the year, the idealized or sacred year, is 360 days, then what we have, if you actually picture it, is that the Earth is describing a circle in its orbit, but then in each degree of motion around that circle, it's turned once on its axis. So what we have there is a synchronization of this cosmic motion representing these numbers. So in any case, the ancient cultures would reckon time measure by 360 days according to the sacred calendar. And by doing so, they could then divide that 360 days of the sacred year into subdivisions such as this right over here. And we'll just run through that very quickly. You'll notice that one decade turns out to be 10 days within the sacred calendar, and that's exactly 14,000.
But have you...
So here we have the same numbers recurring again. You'll notice though that the symbolism of the number is not lost, or the symbolism of the number is consistent irrespective of its order of magnitude. So in other words, you could say the square of 12 being 144 has the same symbolism as 144 times 10, or 144 times 100, as you have right here, or even 144 times 1,000. Again, referring back to the book of Revelations, there's a verse in there referring to the 144,000 redeemed of the earth. And we'll get to that here shortly. It's an interesting quote, because they have various ways of embedding these sacred numbers into the various traditions. You'll notice that 3 decans, or 1 Platonic month, in the Platonic year was 2,160 years, but in the sacred year, 360 days, again, there's that 43,200. So, and go down here, the 1 Platonic season of 6,480 years, 129,600. So if you're taking notes and writing these down, you're going to find that you're writing down the same numbers over and over again, simply raised to different orders of magnitude. Okay. This is just a little graphic that depicts this precessional motion that I'm talking about here. This motion right here, that is generally assumed by most astronomers to be primarily induced onto the Earth by the moon, secondarily by the sun, and then also a contributing factor by the planets. So it's almost, you could almost think of this precessional motion of the Earth's axis as being the vectoral summation of all the gravity forces of the solar system acting on the Earth, causing it acting. See, when the planet rotates on its axis, and this is a critical factor, as it rotates on its axis, it spreads out towards the middle. Its equatorial diameter is greater than its polar diameter. And that, in fact, is critical to the Earth maintaining axial stability, so that it's not doing this in its orbit around the sun. Because if it was doing that, it's likely that higher life would have never evolved in the first place. But due to the fact that it spins, it spreads out so that the diameter of the equator is 26 miles greater than the diameter of the pole. The sum total of all the gravity forces impinging upon the Earth from moon, sun, and planets acts upon that bulge as if it was a flywheel, and is actually pulling it around. And it's that leads to the great year. And what it does is over a period of half the great year, 1 million or 12,960 years, is it reverses the seasons. So that if we were able to jump in a time machine and go back 12,960 or ahead 12,960, we would find that everything was reversed. If we would keep the same Gregorian calendar in place, the seasons would have been reversed, so that winter would be July and summer would be, in fact, and then what we would see is that hemispherically, like we know that when it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's summer in the southern hemisphere. Well, those seasons would be reversed. They flip. It's a back and forth. It's an oscillation between the two hemispheres of the Earth over a period of 12,960 years. This shows the wheel of the great year with all of the ages, the astrological months as they're known. And if we were to place ourselves right at this position right here where it says 0 years BP, BP means before present, and it also is 25,920 years. So what has been happening is that the vernal equinox, a hypothetical point in space occupied by the sun, when day and night are the exact same duration, that vernal point is moving through space as a result of this axial motion of the Earth. And ancient peoples would go to great lengths to try to observe and predict that motion. So they would set up structures, oftentimes on a very large scale, that would be oriented to certain points in space, so that one could, from certain vantage points, such as the center of a ringed megalithic structure, for example, or the center of a temple that had an axial orientation to a certain point on the horizon, one could make minute observations of this slowly shifting vernal equinox, or, for example, the solstices. The vernal equinox and the solstices are two lines in space that are right angles to each other. I'll show you a graphic in a minute. But in any case, as we go around this wheel, this great wheel here, this wheel of this cosmic wheel, what we're going to see is that each of these is a zodiacal sign. We have here Pisces, we have here Aquarius. So now the vernal equinox is poised. It's moving out of the star constellation of Pisces, moving into the star constellation of Aquarius. And so we say that roughly for the last 2,000, or if we want to be precise, 2,160 years, the vernal equinox has been transiting the constellation of Pisces, and therefore we've been in the Piscean age. Prior to that was Aries, prior to that was Taurus. We find that the beginning of modern recorded history goes back to the Taurian age. We can essentially express all of recorded human history between the latter part of the Taurian age through the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, and now into the age of Aquarius, right? Okay. If we go back, we'll notice, though, that the numbers here are the same
Thank you very much, and we love you, and I can tell you that from the bottom of my heart.
Yo, dynamic.
4 years. We've accomplished so much together. I want to thank all of my family and my friends and my staff. I only say this, we have worked hard. We've left it all, as the athletes would say, we've left it all in the field. We don't have to come and say, we'll never say in a month when we're sitting
Alright, that's what we get food.
in
Yo,
Florida,
thanks, bro.
we're
Thanks, man.
not
We're
gonna be
close,
looking
man.
at
We're
each other and
close. For
saying,
the
you
DJ
know,
tie.
if we
Thanks for the
only
raid,
worked a little
bro.
bit
How are you
harder,
doing?
You can't work harder.
What are we streaming?
I will always fight for you.
G.
I will be
Thanks, man.
watching, I will be listening, and I will tell you that the future of this country has never been better.
Yo, thank you, bro.
So that in 6,400
We're close, man. We are close. Thank you for the raid,
Taurus
man.
will have moved
We
down
added the
to
down C on the second cam after watching your input
this.
display.
So this is just a recap of those same numbers, and you will notice 8640.
We're really close,
number
though,
of seconds
I
in
think,
one day.
in theory.
You'll notice that in a half a day, 43,200.
They don't suck.
Well, if you go back to
Thanks, bro.
the
Legend, man.
dawning of the age of Aries,
Thank you, man.
4,320 years ago.
Got a new HD capture card too.
And these are just more interesting ways that these numbers show up. If you take 25,000,
I got it for the Switch for $30 Canadian. Yeah. Got it for the Switch, and I was like, well, why don't I just use it for the 64 too?
Exactly 432
And here I am.
minutes. 25,920 hours in turn is 1,080 days. And 25,920 days is equal to 72 years in the sacred calendar. Which is interesting because I think if you, most determinations of the average human lifespan right now in history is about 72 years. So you could think of a human lifespan as being equivalent to one day of the great year. There's an interesting proportional relationship going on there between the total processional
We duped 24 yesterday. That was pretty encouraging.
20 years and one human lifetime.
And frustrating.
In the Vedas, they had various ways of encoding references to numbers. Let the Brahman hear the praise we utter. This hath the four-horned buffalo emitted. 4 are his horns, 3 are the feet that bear him, his heads are 2, his hands are 7 in number. Notice 4, 3, 2, raised to the 7th power, gives you the number of years in the ancient Vedic time span, the Kalpa, 4,320,000,000 years, which I find to be suspiciously close to the modern estimate for the age of the universe, which is about 4.5, or the age of the Earth rather, which is about 4.5 billion years. So this was one way they had of encoding or embedding references to these sacred numbers in the Vedas. And this is probably some of the oldest writings extant where this canon of numerology is presented. In ancient Sumeria, from the various writings of historians like Berossus and others, and from the Sumerian clay tablets, we're able to find that there were references to 10 pre- or antediluvian kings.
I'm still going too far there.
Pre-diluvian mean? Before the flood, right. So they had this belief that there were 10 kings reigning before the flood. And you'll notice the numbers that they ascribed to each of the kings, the reign. Those numbers now should all be becoming familiar to you. You've seen a bunch of them already. There's 43,200, 64,800, 36. You'll notice 64,800 is presented twice, actually 3 times. The total, though, 432,000 years. That's a long span of time. Do you think they meant this literally, or is this strictly symbolic and figurative? Is it possible that the king could have reigned for 36,000 years? I tend to think it was symbolical, but you know, it is interesting that one of the universal traditions from ancient cultures is that before the flood, and all the cultures from all over the world recognized that there was a great flood, or even floods that decimated humanity at various times. But they're all pretty much in agreement that prior to the flood, the human lifespan was much longer than it is today, which I find we've all heard about Methuselah living to be 969 years, right? Or Lamech being 777. It seems that they had, in the biblical ages, they seem to have lived about an order of magnitude greater than our modern ages. Which, considering, you know, from my perspective, the things I'd like to get
No, like why? I spazzed. I spazzed out.
In the Vayu Purana, which is again one of the Vedas, we find
spazzed
verses
out.
like this. 360 years, according to the human calculation, constitute one divine year. Wise people know that there are 4 yugas in Bharatavarsa. The first one is Kreta, then follow Treta, Dvapara, and Kali. Probably some of you have heard of the Kali Yuga that we're supposedly in right now, and supposed the age of darkness and the age of ignorance. But you'll notice that they
Why? Like
reckon
why?
time. They have another. The Vedas recognizes a sacred year that they call, or a divine year, which is 360 of our years. Okay, now here's a tabulation of the Vedic ages. And you'll notice,
I remember the 23 dynamics grind, old strat.
and we see that the Kali Yuga,
Those are 6 streams.
432,000. Then we go to 864,000, 1,296,000, 1,728,000, and 4,320,000. You'll notice that the total, or the Mahayuga, the Great Yuga, is 10 times the length of the Kali Yuga. And that's because you'll notice that the Dwapara is twice, the Treta is 3 times, and the Satya is 4 times. So taking the original term, doubling it, then tripling it, then quadrupling it, adding those together will give us 10 times the number we started with. But again, notice the number that the Vedic ages begins with, 432,000, is the same number that the Sumerian king list ends with. So it's almost as if we have 2 different traditions, but one system. And we see that the Sumerians preserved knowledge about the subdivisions of this Yuga time of 432,000 years, and symbolize these subdivisions by the reigns of these 10 pre-Diluvian kings. And then we can see that once we get to 432,000 years, at that point the Vedic cycles kick in, and then we have these that follow. And using the divine year of 360 years yields this column of numbers. And then when we put the duration in the human years, it's interesting, each of the yugas, such as the Kali Yuga, they were all believed to have a period of transition into the age, then the age itself, and then a period of transition out of the age. And so basically what they did was they took the total age. You'll notice here the relationship between the Kali Yugas, the 360,000, and the Sandhya, which was the transition in, and the Sandhyamsa, which was the transition out, are each 1/10 of that, adding up to the total of 432. But you'll notice that we've got the same recurring numbers again.
Follow Dynamics DJ, he's a top 50 GoldenEye player.
And then we have that raised by another order of magnitude. So you see how these same
55th
numbers are
place.
recurring over and over again.
Top 60 player.
And I would suggest that there's a pattern emerging.
Number 1 in our hearts.
I know that for a lot of people, first time they are
No, really, he's really good.
confronted with this kind of information, sometimes it's almost too mind-boggling. You're going, what the heck is all these numbers
He's
mean?
better than me.
You know,
Way better than me.
It's just too many numbers to sort out. But what you realize once you start studying them is that each one of them is kind of a mnemonic, because each number has a whole collection of phenomena
And more
that's
entertaining.
associated with it. And it's still in use today. I mean, how many people, everybody should know that, a square foot is 144 square inches. Anybody who's a builder, a craftsperson, an artist should know basic rules of measurement. The Mayan world ages. Now you notice there, do we see similar numbers? The Baktun, 144,000 days. So it's almost like they had the same numbers, but they're now representing smaller cycles. But it's the same numbers representing these cyclical periods within nature. A tune is 360 days, and that was the sacred calendar that we find all over the ancient world. And then they had the 5 days added to that, the 5 unlucky days. So again, we see the same numbers being repeated redundantly throughout these various traditions. Sacred numbers embedded in solar system.
Why, man?
I'm
Why?
going to show you a few examples of this in order to convey to you the idea. The solar orb. Well, if we measure that, we discover its radius is 432,000 miles, which of course means that its diameter is 864,000. So notice that we measure the sun according to the human measure of miles. And by the way, what is the origin of the mile unit that we use? Anybody know? Origin of the mile? Origin of the mile, it comes from the Latin word mil, which means 1,000. So it's talking about 1,000 something. What would it be talking about? 1,000 what? 1,000 paces that average 5.28 feet in length. It actually goes back, we know that Romans were using a mile that were 1,000 paces, and they would lay out, Rome, for example, had a city center, and everything was measured outwards from that city center according to paces. and those paces were 1,000 of them gave the Roman mile. The Roman pace was a little bit shorter than the British pace, which is where we get our mile from. Our mile, in fact, interestingly, and I'm going to show you a diagram of this shortly, Stonehenge is 105, the outer ring of the Sarsen stone circle measures right at about 105.6 feet, which makes it 1/5 of a mile.
Come on, man. Like, come on.
1/50th of a mile, I'm sorry. That and several other numbers that we find in megalithic structures in ancient England suggest that the mile was actually a unit of measure that was being used as long ago as 4,000 years or longer. And we're still using it today, the same unit of measure that could have been used 4,000 years ago. And for that reason, you know, and once you begin to get into and understand
okay, whatever,
the sacred
whatever,
basis
like
of
whatever.
our ancient metrological or measuring systems, you'll realize that
So
if we
fucking
convert
dumb, man.
completely over to the metric system, we're going to lose something very, very profound. All right, remember what was the length of the Kali Yuga? 432,000 years. What was the length of the Dwapara Yuga? 864,000 years. What was the length of a Platonic month? 1/12 of the great year. Anybody remember? 2,160 years, right? The same number of degrees that measure the cube. All right, what are we looking at here? Anybody recognize that? Look familiar? The moon has a radius of 1,080 miles, which gives it a diameter of 2,160. Remember I said that 1,080 or 108, and it's double. 2,160 was a lunar number. See, this is a clue to you now. There are several references, for example, in the Sumerian tradition describing the ark built by Sisyphus, which is being described as a cube that makes no sense. You think, what kind of a ship is it that would be described as a cube? You know, that wouldn't be very seaworthy, a cube, right? But it's not referring to an actual ship as we think of it. It's referring to the cubing of the sphere. And in this case, the sphere that it's referring to is the moon, which was symbolically considered to be an ark to many of the ancient cultures that believed that the earth was periodically destroyed by great catastrophes. So we have the number 1,080, and we have the number 2,160. And then we have the earth. You know, that's the earth. And again, because of the spinning of the earth on its axis, we have this difference between the polar diameter, 7899, or just thinking round number 7,900 miles, and the equatorial diameter, 7,926. So that creates a 26-mile difference. And thank you for that 26-mile difference, because life on Earth would be a very chaotic affair without that bulge. We see that the diameter of a sphere with the same surface area as Earth is 7,920 miles. And also the diameter
What did it get stuck
of
on?
the Earth, when you take it from, if you slice it through the Tropic of Cancer through to the Tropic of Capricorn, that diameter also is about 7,920. So we use 7,920 as the sacred number to represent the Earth, because even though the Earth varies considerably between equatorial and polar diameters, we find that at a very significant piercing through of the Earth's diameter from one tropic to the other tropic turns out to be 7,920 miles. We also find that if we take a perfect sphere that has the same area, the same surface area as the Earth actually has, its diameter would be 7,920 miles. So that's the number we use for the Earth, which means that its radius is half that, or 3,960. And in most books you read, astronomy and so forth, when they're talking in round numbers about the radius or the diameter of the Earth, these are the numbers they use. 7920 and 3960. Okay. Now, what I've got here is evidence for advanced geodetic knowledge in archaic times. What is geodesy or geodetic knowledge? Geodesy is the determination of the size and the shape of the Earth Early in the 19th century, such knowledge was acquired by extensive land surveying and triangulating over large tracts of the Earth's surface. Since the 1970s, orbital satellites have provided the most accurate picture of the Earth's exact size and mass distribution. Any advanced comprehension of the larger picture of our planet as a suitable abode for the evolution of higher life requires knowledge of its size and shape. The total mass, of course, determines g, the gravitational constant. The equatorial bulge is an integral component of the forces acting to impose rotation and orbital stability on Earth as it wheels about the Sun. The relevance of these two basic factors to the evolution of life cannot be underestimated. Ancient master builders understood Earth's fundamental geodetic parameters on a level not equaled until the advent of modern satellite survey. How do we know that? Well, probably the most salient means we have of knowing that is the Great Pyramid of Cheops itself. And there's been lots and lots of speculation about what the form or what the function of the Great Pyramid was. Some of it to me is pretty out there. Some of it I think is pretty abstract and speculative. What I've always thought does make the most sense and has the greatest credibility is the pyramid is essentially a model of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, and I'll show you how. The thing you have to understand when you're looking at the measurement of the Earth in terms of its size and shape is that we have lines. Everybody knows latitude and longitude. Latitude is measured north and south of the equator. Longitude is the measure around this way. Parallels are lines that run parallel to the equator. And traveling along one of the parallels, we would be displacing ourselves longitudinally. But parallels actually measure, you can see that this parallel here, this is probably the Arctic Circle. It looks to me like about 66.5 degrees north. So it is parallel to the equator, right? So depending on what parallel you are, every line of latitude, north and south, has a corresponding parallel. And you know that from the equator to the North Pole is going to be 90 degrees, and likewise from the equator to the South Pole is going to be 90 degrees of arc. Then in turn we have meridian lines, which are lines that run north-south, but actually measure distances east and west. So that if you traveled from one meridian
How did that not blow up?
Meridian,
Like
you would
what?
have traveled from east to west.
Like what?
Every point on the surface of the Earth has a local meridian. We have a local meridian here, and it's basically the way you would find it is if you walked out here. I believe this is generally south, isn't it, this way? So if we went out here and we looked exactly south and exactly north, and then the zenith overhead, the point 90 degrees up from a flat horizon, and we struck an arc from the south point through the zenith point to the North Pole, that arc would be our local meridian. And as the Earth turns under that local meridian, we measure all astronomical motion relative to our point on the surface of the Earth with respect to that local meridian. Now, you'll notice that as you go through the parallels form virtually perfect circles. The meridian lines, on the other hand, are not circles because of the flattening of the Earth. Because of the expansion of the equator, if you draw a line around it this way, and cut the Earth this way, it is not going to be a circle. If you cut it this way, it will be a circle. Okay, that creates very subtle differences in geometry. When you're measuring a meridian line north to south, what happens is that as you travel north away from the equator, if you are going on a perfect sphere, then each degree of latitude north would have the same distance. But it's not a perfect sphere, it's flattened. So as you're moving towards the North Pole, the Earth is actually flattening out. The Earth's radius is shrinking. So it's flattening out. What that means is that to traverse a degree of arc, you have to travel further as you get away from the equator towards the North Pole. Okay, I'm explaining this because you've got to understand this to see how the ancients actually understood, how they demonstrated to us that they understood the size and shape of the Earth with a high degree of accuracy. So again, parallels are going to be in circles, and you're going to notice that the biggest circle is going to be the equatorial circle, and as you travel towards the poles, those circles get smaller in size. So therefore, if you took the meridian lines, which would be the dotted
We're gonna
lines,
load the Vapor
the
420.
distance between, say, 1 degree of meridians at the equator is going to be greater than that distance between the same two meridians, say at our latitude here in Atlanta, which is about 34 degrees north. Or further north.
Why?
As you travel further north, those meridian lines converge until you would get to the North Pole, and then they meet each other and have zero distance between them. Okay. This is taken out of the Smithsonian meteorological tables, and what we're looking at here, without belaboring this, is you'll notice latitude 0 degrees, and you go through up to 90 degrees. And what this is showing is if we look into statute miles right there, this says length of 1 degree of the meridian. So this is the line from equator up to the North Pole. Well, if you look at the first number, which, let's see if we can zoom in a little here, you'll notice that at 0, when you travel, leave the equator and go to the 1st degree north latitude, you've gone 68.703 miles.
Why?
But if you look down here at the very last one, when you traverse that last degree from 89 and you finally get to the North Pole, you've traveled 69.4 miles. So those degrees have stretched out. Okay. Now this is important to understand how the ancients were able to demonstrate to future generations that they understood the size and the shape of the earth. And then we have one length of 1 degree of the parallel. If you notice right there, I don't know if you can read it from out there, but that says 69.172 miles. So think of a circle going around the Earth's equator. You've traveled 1 degree, 1/360 of that distance around. You've gone 69.172 miles. Let's go halfway up from equator to North Pole, which would be 45 degrees, and you see right there, you've gone 49 miles. Then when you get up to the pole itself, when you're 1 degree away from the North Pole, you only have to go 1.2 miles because those meridian lines have converged. So now, the thing to grasp here is that if we're measuring the size and the shape of the Earth, that's going to vary depending on where on
Why?
the Earth we're making those measurements. This is important because what we discover is that the ancient peoples knew this and incorporated it into their architecture so that they would derive units of measurement that were ultimately based upon the size and shape of the Earth where the structure was being built. Now let's take the most prominent one. Before we get to that, this is geodetic data, and you'll notice here we've got going back to 1830, which was the first attempt in modern times to determine the size and shape of the Earth. And let's go, since that's meters, let's go to something we'll recognize, miles. We're talking about the radius here, and you'll notice as you're coming down through here, we get to these last two, World Grid System 72 and Geodetic Reference System 80 are the two that were determined by satellite measurements. And you'll notice that as we come through here, we've got a polar radius in miles and an equatorial radius in miles. And then we have the difference in the two radii right here. And we assume that as we've come through, we're progressively getting better and better at measuring the size and shape of the Earth. And
Why,
finally,
man?
with
Like,
satellite
why?
measurements, we're getting down here, and we've determined that the polar radius, for example, 3,949.8934, 3,949.8948. What does that translate into? Well, let's see. In terms of feet, that's a difference of, 250 feet roughly between, between these two measurements. In other words, between the first satellite measurement in 72 and the second one in 1980, the difference was about 250 feet, say.
The history of man may be far longer and stranger than we think. The Great Pyramid may indeed not fit in with what we believe about the past and the nature of the world. Thousands of years ago, someone measured the Earth with remarkable accuracy and recorded this information in the dimensions of the largest and possibly the oldest stone building on the planet, William R. Fix.
Generally, the age of the pyramid is given around 4,200 years. It's roughly about the same age as the Sphinx. Some of you are probably familiar with the redating of the Sphinx by several geologists, primarily Robert Schoch from Boston University, who has studied the weathering of the limestone composing the Sphinx and the surrounding quarry that the Sphinx is situated in, and has determined that the rock has been severely weathered by water erosion. And of course, this Giza Plateau has been desert for the last 4,000 years, so it's not likely you're going to find severe water erosion on the Sphinx if it's only 4,000 years old. In fact, so severe is the water erosion that it's likely that the Sphinx is probably tens of thousands of years old. However, Robert Schoch, in most of his public presentations, usually places it at 7,000 to 9,000 years, but he's told me personally he just uses that because he's deliberately being very conservative because he's in the academic community, but he's perfectly willing to believe that it could be much older than that. And I've discussed the extent of the water erosion with him and discovered that he actually hasn't looked in depth at the comparable studies of rates of limestone weathering, which I spent a couple of months about 10 years ago studying, going around to various places where there were limestones and where you could see examples of limestone that had been weathered, and had looked at, read the literature that had been done on limestone weathering, and had concluded that, it would be a minimum of 20,000 years worth of weathering. And that's a minimum if you took the Sphinx and set it in a climate with rainfall, like say we've been having for the last 3 months, which would average out to about 45 inches a year. Even with rainfall like we've been seeing here in Atlanta in the last 3 months, it would take the Sphinx a minimum of 20 to 30,000 years to get the level of erosion. That raises the question regarding the Great Pyramid. Could it be as old? And I see no reason why not. Problem here, though, is that the Great Pyramid was once covered in white limestone casing stones, highly polished, and according to Arabic traditions, pretty much all the Arabic traditions and legends about the Great Pyramid concur that the outside of the pyramid prior to the stripping of the casing stones was covered, completely covered in hieroglyphs. And it just boggles one's mind to contemplate what might have been written in it. But clearly, I have a hard time imagining a greater act of vandalism in all of history than the stripping of those stones. In fact, there had been efforts to get into the pyramid up until the time of Al-Mamun, which was, I think, around 1200 AD, but they were completely ineffectual. And then somewhere around the 12th century, I've forgotten the exact year, there was a great earthquake in northern Egypt. And it caused most of the buildings in Cairo to collapse, and it also loosened some of the casing stones on the pyramid, which allowed them to get in and pry those stones loose from the top. And all of the stones were then stripped off, and that indurate high-quality limestone was stripped off and recarved and used in buildings to rebuild Cairo. So I've often thought there's probably temples somewhere in Cairo where maybe some of those original stones are still to be found with inscriptions intact. Of course, I have no idea, but I've oftentimes thought, wouldn't that be cool? Anyways, they stripped off the stones, and as they stripped them off, there was a lot of rubble that fell down and buried the bottom of the pyramid, which turned out to be a good thing because it buried the bottom casing stones from those bottom and preserved them. And so from those, the various researchers could determine what the original exact angle of the pyramid was. And according to most calculations, it was around 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 14 seconds. I don't know if that level of accuracy is credible or not, but 51 degrees, 51 minutes would be. And from there, we can then determine what the geometry of the pyramid would have been and what its original height would have been simply by taking the tangent of that angle, 51 degrees, 51 minutes, And knowing the base length, one could calculate what the original height would have been to a high degree of accuracy. So that's been done by, 4 or 5 different people over the years. J.H. Cole in 1925 did what's considered to be the definitive survey of the Great Pyramid. He was a professional surveyor who did a very meticulous survey after they had just cleared away all of the rubble, and he had access to it. He did it under contract to the government of
Okay,
Egypt.
what?
The numbers
Like,
that I'm about to
come
show you are
on,
mostly
dude.
derived from his
What?
survey.
Like, come on.
So, what we have here is here's some of the original casing stones.
Oh,
and they
I'm
sit
gonna
on a
lose my
called
fucking
sockle,
mind,
which
man.
is this
Like, this
base,
fucking
which was
game,
measured to
dude.
be 55 centimeters in thickness. And of course, you got to bear in mind that this original slope casing stone, it wasn't stepped like that originally. It was a smooth profile. And so here you have, of course, here you see that the casing stones were damaged by the rubble falling down, but enough of them were still intact that one could make this accurate determination of the original angle. Here's the sockle, which is 55 centimeters thick, and it sits directly on bedrock. So it actually, what it does is it creates 2 ways that one could measure the height of the pyramid, either with or without the sockle. There's also 2 ways of measuring the base. This is a reconstruction from 1991 work on pharaonic stonemasonry. And this shows that outside the corners, which was the core masonry, there are these sockets. And I found one picture showing a socket. This is showing one of the sockets that's still there, that sits outside the core masonry. But based on those sockets, they were able to reconstruct what the original base of the pyramid would have looked like. So here would have been the 51 degrees, 51 minutes, coming down, sitting on the 55 centimeter thick sockle here, like this. Well, what this did was it gave 2 ways of measuring the perimeter of the pyramid's base. One could be measured from this point up on top of the sockle. The other could be measured from down here that included the sockle. So what you ended up with was 2 ways of measuring the pyramid's base. Well, which one was the correct one? Well, they were both correct. I think that they were actually intending to embody in there that there were 2 ways of measuring the pyramid's base. So what we have is the length of the base on the sockle, which is the shorter of the 2 up there. It was varied from side to side. You'll notice 755 at the smallest to 756 just over at the largest. So there was some variation. There was probably a reason for that variation, actually, but we won't get into that because it just gets too technical for what we're talking about today. But the total of those measured around the 4 sides would be 3,023.139 feet. If you're taking notes, that'd be a good number to write down. Okay, so now let's see what the measure is around that includes the sockle, or the base. And we see that each side is roughly 5 feet longer, 760 to 761. Each side, again, is a little different, but we get a total of 3,043.433 feet. Okay, so I'm going to, over here, I'm going to write down a few numbers that we saw through our radius of the moon, diameter of the moon, radius of the sun, diameter of the sun, number of seconds in a day would be 43,200. Number of seconds in a half a day, number of seconds in a full day, 86,400. What were some of our more other numbers? Oh yeah, 1440 was one, 7920. Diameter of the earth, just so they're up there in front of you, we can refer to them as we go on here. All right. So here is profile the Great Pyramid with a 51 degree, 51 minute angle. To make it easy, I've just rounded off the numbers, 481 feet in height. That would be not including the sockle, the base. 755.85, I just picked one to use. And there's our 51 degree, 51 minute angle. And we find that when we measure it this way, it turns out to be almost exactly 11/7. There's There's some other interesting geometry going on related to the golden section, which I don't intend to get into today because it makes more sense if you're actually studying sacred geometry and you're familiar and you've made these drawings, because in a sacred geometry class, just like in the old Pythagorean and Platonic lodges, we draw, and then we eventually build models. And that's the way to really get familiar with this and get these numbers as part of your consciousness. So I'm not going to get into the connection with the golden section today. When we measure, including the socle, this becomes our height, 482.7575 feet, and the base, 760.9 feet. Okay, those are the numbers we're going to look at for a second here. If we look at these are various estimates. We're looking at this one right here, the coal height estimate plus the socle at 21.6 inches gives a total of the height above bedrock of 482.7575 feet. So now we're going to go back to the Earth so we can see how these numbers link the two. We take 1 square degree of latitude and longitude at the equator. And we're standing at the equator. Okay, we know the polar radius now is 13 miles less than the equatorial radius. So what that means is that the circle this way is shorter than the circle. The biggest circle that defines the Earth is the equatorial circle. So a degree of measure on the equator is going to be the biggest, the longest of any degree we measure anywhere on the Earth, the equator. Okay, the north-south is going to be a little bit shorter. And you'll notice right there, we've got 68.7 miles north to south and 69.17 east to west. So it's not a perfectly square unit, is it? It's a little bit distorted. Well, that distortion is totally significant because it's that distortion that is a measure of the Earth's departure from being a perfect sphere. And it's that departure of a perfect sphere that is very significant to us, because without that, again, Earth's orbital stability would be non-existent. Okay, so we're going to divide this up a little bit. If we take this square degree of latitude north to south, longitude east to west, and we look very carefully down in the lower right-hand corner, you're going to see something, a little square. You see that little square? That represents 1 minute, 1/60th of the degree this way, 1/60th of the degree this way. So that's 1 minute of latitude and longitude, all right? We're going to take a closer look at that, and we will see that 1 minute then is 6,045.881 north to south, 6,087 east to west, which is what we expect. The east-west should be a little bit longer, and that's 1 square minute of latitude and longitude. Okay, now we're going to divide each of those lengths into 2. We're going to divide our square minute into 1/4 sections. And here's what I want you to notice. When we do that, we take 1/4 of a square minute of latitude and longitude. Look at our dimension east to west. And look at our dimension north to south. And look at these 2 numbers. In fact, here's an accurate calculation. We take the 482.755 feet, which is the height, and what we discover is that if we multiply that by the number 43,200, which is one of our sacred numbers that we've seen right there, 43,200, it shows up in the Vedas and the Sumerian king lists, etc., etc. If we multiply the height of the pyramid by that number, this is what we come out with, 3,949.83 miles. And notice the difference between the pyramid, which I call the standard polar radius, and World Grid System 72 is only 313 feet over the entire size of the Earth. So we have essentially the pyramid being a scale model of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, at a scale of 43,200 to 1. If we take the pyramid, enlarge it by 43,200, its height, including the socle, now becomes the polar radius of the Earth within 300 feet of our satellite surveys. Then the two measures of the base are exactly the difference between the east-west difference and the north-south difference at a square minute at the equator. Now, the skeptic and the reductionist would dismiss this and say, it's just a coincidence, you're just playing with numbers. And I would say, okay, you can believe what you want, but it's there. The numbers are there. You can take the surveys of Egypt by Cole, you can take the geodetic surveys. I didn't make those numbers up, or I didn't fudge them. And what you discover is that when you expand it by 43,200, which, if the number was just some arbitrary number, but it turns out that the factor of expansion turns out to be one of the critical sacred numbers within the ancient systems. And so here we have the pyramid now enlarged by 43,200 times. And another way to think of it is if we go back to this diagram right here, you'll see that as the Earth turns, every half second, it's going to turn this far. So it means that every 2 seconds, the Earth, if you're standing on the equator, in 2 seconds, the Earth has turned 143,200th part of its total orbit. So if you're standing on the equator, in 2 seconds precisely, the Earth has turned a distance exactly equal to the distance around the base of the Great Pyramid. Now you can dismiss that as being coincidence, but the numbers don't lie. They're there. And so when William R. Fix was saying that someone somewhere thousands of years ago was able to measure the Earth with great precision, and I haven't, of course, elaborated upon all the details of this. I'm trying to give you the overall picture of how it might have worked. Referring back to our geodetic data, if we look at the various ellipsoids that give the polar radius, and then we take each of those polar radii, going from all of these ellipsoids down the Clark ellipsoid, has been the one of 1880, has been the one used in the United States for all non-military and non-NASA related measurements. We still use on a day-to-day basis. If you take a topographic map, and you're going out like a 7.5 quadrangle, and you're going out navigating with a topographic map put out by the U.S. Geological Survey, they're using the Clark ellipsoid right there. But you'll notice that when we take these various polar radii lengths in feet and divide them by 43,200, you can see the numbers we get right here. Remember, the height of the pyramid is estimated at 482.7575. So looking at this, what you'd see on here, which one would be the closest? Well, you notice it's come out very, very close to the satellite survey. Given that it's very and see, when you got to ask yourself, well, why is there a difference between the satellite survey of 72 and the satellite survey of 80? Well, if we did another one again with as high a degree of accuracy, we would discover there's still going to be a discrepancy. And the reason is that the Earth spinning through space, there are various tidal forces working on the Earth which are constantly causing it to distort its shape by up to 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 feet. So we never would be able to get more accurate than 300 or 400 feet because the Earth itself is changing shape. And if we were to measure it every year for the next 10 years, we would get 10 different numbers. They'd all be very close, but they would deviate somewhat because the Earth itself, there are tidal bulges. Where's the moon relative to the Earth? That's going to affect. If the moon and the sun are on the same side of the Earth, that will affect the shape of the Earth up to being several hundred feet measured over the diameter of the Earth. And so it is not amiss to say that the pyramid enshrines a measure of the Earth that could be considered as accurate as those determined by modern satellite surveys. That to me is a very profound insight, because it does suggest that somebody once upon a time was able to measure the Earth size and shape with that level of precision. And if they were able to do that, what's the implication of that? See, that's the interesting part. Because no primitive culture, using the method of Eratosthenes in about 300 BC in Greece, he measured the Earth and was generally considered to be quite accurate because he was able to get the circumference of the Earth within about 500 miles of its actual measured circumference by using the methods available to the ancient Greeks, you see. And he was considered to be the first to measure by basically putting a stick in the ground and measuring the angle of the shadow on the longest day of the year over a couple of successive years. That's actually an exercise we do in the sacred geometry class because it's very interesting how he did that. But he was considered to be, pretty proficient because he was able to determine that the size of the Earth was, the circumference of the Earth was, 25,000 miles, when it's generally considered to be about 24,800, depending on where you measure. So he was, maybe within 50 miles of the actual dimension of the Earth, but nowhere near as close as the pyramid would have been. So again, even if the pyramid was built 4,200 years ago, you got to say who 4,200 years ago had the technology to measure the Earth with that degree of accuracy. Now, that we know of, nobody 4,200 years ago did, or how they would have done it, we don't know. On the other hand, if it turns out that the pyramid could be much older, it leads us back to the, going back 10,000 to 20,000 years. This to me is one of those little, sort of like the little crack in the dike. If you don't keep it plugged, the whole edifice of contemporary knowledge could get swept away. Because we can't acknowledge that somebody 10,000 or 20,000 years ago was scientifically sophisticated. That was the days of Cro-Magnon man and Alley-oop living in the cave and so forth. Cavemen, which is a silly idea, actually. Yes, I'm sure people did take refuge in caves when things got really crazy out here. Yes, I think people did take refuge in caves. But see, this is one of those things, again, that if you accept that it's not just a coincidence, it opens up a whole can of worms that mainstream science generally doesn't want to address. Because we're the epitome of scientific evolution right here and now, right? Nobody, before we built satellites, could have measured the Earth to within a couple of 100 feet of its actual dimensions. So, given 2 seconds of time, 143,200th part of the daily rotation, a point on the equator will travel a distance precisely equal to the perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base as measured with the socle. In 1/2 second of time, a point on the equator will rotate a distance equal to one side of the base of the Great Pyramid measured with the socle. So here you have a time and space measure integrated into one. The time measure comes in because it's the span of time that the Earth has moved. In 2 seconds, the Earth has turned and moved a distance within a fraction of an inch, being the distance around the base of the Great Pyramid. And so the height of the Great Pyramid measured with the socle is 143,200th part of the Earth's polar radius. So therefore, the Great Pyramid is a model of one hemisphere of the Earth at a scale of 1 to 43,200. So if we took the Great Pyramid and we created a duplicate and turned it upside down and put the two together base to base, that would now give us the polar diameter. One more example, the Parthenon, to show that this geodetic knowledge was still extant down to the time of the building of the Parthenon about 2,400 years ago. This is the east facade. We're all familiar with the Parthenon. It's almost as well known as the Great Pyramid. Well, if we measure its base in the manner that I'm showing here, it's 100 Greek feet. So how long was a Greek foot? A little bit longer than our modern foot of 12 inches. Before we do that, let's look at the dimensions of the Parthenon based upon our American feet that we use. The east facade is 101.2957 feet. So if we divide that by 100, we get the length of the Greek foot, which would have been 1.0129, etc., of our American, which are actually the British feet. Okay, I better
come
write
on,
that
man.
down so we don't forget it. That's good enough right there. There's the width of the Parthenon measured in our American feet. And also notice the latitude of Athens, where the Parthenon is located, is 37 degrees 58 minutes north. And I'm going to write that down, 37 degrees 58 minutes. So it's almost 38 degrees north. And here we have, based upon numerical and proportional relationships augmented by extensive analysis of ancient structures, artifacts, and texts, Stachini, who was considered one of the preeminent metrologists of the 20th century, he determined various lengths of the foot. He came up with the Greek foot of 1.011464. Now notice here we've got the width of the east facade of the Parthenon divided by 100 gives a Greek foot of 1.0129 for a difference of 0.018 inch in excess of the length of the Greek foot as calculated by Stachini. It is acknowledged by architectural historians that the Parthenon was originally built to be 100 Greek feet in width. This would have made it equal to 101.14 English feet when built. Now if we go back to the length of 1 degree of the meridian, and we look right here at the latitude of Athens, we find something very interesting. Length of 1 degree of the meridian at the latitude of Athens is 68.962 miles, or 364,121.647 feet. So if we take that number, divide it by 60, it gives us the length of 1 minute of meridian arc. Then we divide that meridian arc by 60, it gives us 1 second of meridian arc. And notice what 1 second of meridian arc is, 101.1449 feet. So 1 second of meridian arc at 38 degrees north latitude, given the international ellipsoid and the Clark ellipsoid, you'll know here
Come
that
on,
it's
man.
exact.
I'm like, fuck you.
So in other words, what we have there, the total difference in length of 1 second of meridian arc at 38 degrees north latitude and the east facade of the Parthenon is 0.05 inch. But again, that's for 38 north latitude, and it's actually at 37.58. So if we make that adjustment of 2 minutes of arc south, this 0.05 pretty much just disappears into nothing. So what we have is the Parthenon, again, maybe coincidence, but here we have the Parthenon being precisely 1 second of arc of the Earth's circumference at that latitude that it's placed. Now again, that implies somebody was able to measure the Earth with incredible precision, if this isn't a coincidence. And I think the burden of proof would be on the person who tries to dismiss this as being coincidental. Because the two examples I've shown you here could be multiplied many times over. We haven't even talked about the Gothic cathedrals, and the fact that every Gothic cathedral was built with its own cubit. And that cubit is based upon a multiple or a subdivision of the meridian length at the latitude that the cathedral was built. So you could take many examples of this, and what I'm suggesting here is not necessarily that the Gothic cathedral builders of 800 years ago were able to measure the Earth with that accuracy. But then again, it does seem to imply that somebody was able to measure the Earth, that maybe there has been a tradition going back to who knows when, from the building of the pyramids, coming down through the age of the Greeks, right down to the building of the European Gothic cathedrals 800 years ago, a tradition of very sophisticated geodetic knowledge. Well, again, this opens up a huge can of worms about when people were supposed to, what they knew and when they were supposed to have learned it. So there's another dimension to this as well, and this is, I'm only going to show you a few examples out of hundreds of possible examples I could be showing you. Ancient writings, Semitic writings, and I'm coming with two examples here. The Hebrew ancient writings, which would be Kabbalistic writings, the Hebrew Old Testament, the Torah, the Midrash, all of those. And then the Greek alphabet, the New Testament was written in Greek, all of the Pythagorean and Neo-Pythagorean literature written into Greek. Well, as it turns out, both of those languages, this was prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. The Hindu-Arabic numeral system is when we came up with what we now have is we have our alphabet and we have our set of numbers. And they're two different things, right? We use our alphabet for the spoken language and written language, and we use numbers for calculating and mathematics. But they're different. You know, we don't, but prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, in the Semitic languages, the same symbols that were letters were also numbers. And the key was what you see right here, called a denary system. So Aleph was 1, Bet was 2, Gimel was 3, Dalet was 4, He was 5, Waw was 6, Zayin 7, and so on, down to Resh, Shin, and Tau, 200, 300, and 400. Yud, which was considered the seed of the Hebrew alphabet, had the value of 10. Okay, so units, tens, and hundreds. Then there was a symbolic component to each of the, for example, Aleph originally was the word for an ox. And Bet was originally the word for house. Gimel, originally the word for camel, and so on. Then we get to the Greek system, and it's also a denary system, units, tens, and hundreds. So alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, digamma, zeta, eta, theta, etc., 1 through 9. Then iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, kappa, 10 through 90, and so on. Rho through Sampi wasn't actually a written letter, it was just simply included to get the value of 900. Okay, so we have the same system, units, tens, and hundreds. So how is this employed? Well, here's an example. Here's aletheia, which was the Greek word for truth. And if you add up the eta, the alpha, the lambda, the eta, theta, epsilon, iota, and alpha, based on the values that I just showed you, the total value is 72. And that's one of our key sacred numbers. Because most of the numbers that I showed you here are multiples of 72, 36 or 72. Katabala, which means conception, the first moment of creation. Kappa, alpha, tau, alpha, beta, omicron, lambda, eta. Take the values again directly from the historically authenticated table that I showed you, and they add up to 432. So there you see these numbers showing up here. Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem. Iota, epsilon, rho, omicron, upsilon. This would be the Greek spelling in the New Testament. Sigma, alpha, lambda, eta, and mu. There's the values of the individual letters. Iota, which was 10, epsilon, 5, etc. And when you add those up, you get 864. Again, do we find that number on our list? Yes, we do. These numbers, again, are showing up with redundancy. The Temple of Immortality, Oneos Thanat. Let's see, I forgot how to pronounce that. Athanasius. Oneos Oneos.
Come on, man.
Athanasius, that's it. The Temple of Immortality. So if we take that spelling, add it up, it also is 864. And I'll work on my pronunciations for next time. The Holy Ghost, Toahian Pneuma. Pneuma, like root of our words like pneumatic, means the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit. Add up those, the value of those, and you get 1080. The Fountain of Wisdom, Pegasophias, also adds to 1080. So these are just a few examples of, then I heard another great voice from heaven saying, "Come out, my people, out of her, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues." A phrase from the book of Revelations, and 1296, which is half of the great year cycle. So I mean, these examples can be multiplied by hundreds, literally by hundreds. And this is actually one of the subdivisions of the study of Kabbalah, which is the gematria, the study of the numerical or mathematical basis of language. And what you discover when you go into the mathematical basis of language is the whole thing is constructed upon the same architecture of sacred numbers that we've been looking at here for the last hour. Probably are all familiar with things like, here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, 666. You ever heard that? Probably the most famous and controversial number out of the Bible, 666. Well, if you want to understand what that is actually referring to, you have to peel back the outer literal representation of these tales and look at the underlying mathematical architecture, because that's where it's concealed. And it actually turns out that the orbital velocity of the Earth around the Sun is 66,600 miles per hour, exactly. And that's one of the first astronomical connections, and then there's many, many more connections with that number that we find occurring in sacred geometry. So all of this, there's a lot of silliness and accretion, stuff that's accreted to the belief in that number by basically fundamentalists and superstitious people who don't look at the underlying science. But we will take a couple of minutes here and look at a few things. I lifted up, this is from the Old Testament, Zechariah, I lifted up mine eyes again and looked, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then said I, whither goest thou? And he said unto me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof and what is the length thereof. Old Testament prophet, Zechariah. So here was the beginning of his prophetic experience, his prophetic vision, as he sees this man who's got a measuring line in his hand. And he says he's going to go measure the holy city. And when he does see, then what's the revelation that follows? The revelation is the sacred geometry that composes that is the basis of the architecture of the holy city. So the whole revelation is really, it's a geometric revelation. Again from the book of Revelations, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount of Zion, which to anybody who's versed knows that that's a reference to the sign of Aries, the lamb, and with him 144,000, which is this number right here, having his father's name written in their foreheads. What does that mean? Well, it means that somebody who studies sacred geometry, eventually you've got these numbers as such an integral part of your consciousness in your forehead, in your frontal lobe, your waking consciousness, that these numbers literally become a part of the way you experience reality and experience the world, because the numbers are all around us in the world. It gives a shape to the world. It defines the periods of time that governs the cycles of our life. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts. What are the four beasts? The bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. It divides the cosmic wheel into periods of 6,480 years, which I certainly should add, because that's an important number. So there's a veiled reference to that cycle of time, 6,480. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. Now, when you get into Kabbalistic studies, you can go to the English translations to lead you into the outer portals. But if you want to get into the inner teaching, you've got to go beyond that. You've got to go back to the original languages. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but the word redeemed is actually a very interesting word. It's talking about the redeemed of the earth, 144,000. We discovered that the word was agorazo, from agora, and it means to go to market. So basically what it's saying is that those who achieve salvation at the day of judgment are those who go out and go shopping. What? Well, isn't that what George Bush told us to do after the, see? So George Bush, he had his thumb on the pulse of, but actually, see, what's the connection with going to market? Well, as a place properly, the town square, that should be the first clue. The square. See, there's your geometry. As a place of public resort, by implication, a market or thoroughfare. So the idea first is the idea of a square, because the marketplace would be built around a square, a literal square. So it became associated with the idea of people gathering within this square, see? It comes from, well, agorazo comes from, see here. So to go to market, by implication to purchase, especially to redeem. And it comes from this root, agora, which is related to this, aguero, the idea of collecting one's faculties. This is the idea of collecting within the square again, right? Well, this, thinking now about metaphorically collecting one's faculties, but also to waken or to rouse literally from sleep, from sitting or lying, from disease or death, or figuratively from obscurity or ruin. It means to awake, to lift up, to raise up, to rear up. So see, all of these ideas are what you're led to once you start going into the original Kabbalistic meanings of the language. So what starts out like go shopping, go to the market, means going to the town square. It means the gathering within this square. So here's the link with your geometry. But then one of the words that we look at when we study the Kabbalistic study of words is we look at the original roots, but then we look at how did they bifurcate and how did they lead, because you can follow the evolutionary paths of language to get back to what some of the original meanings actually were, to try to get to what the authors of these sacred writings were really trying to get to.
Like
Because
what?
you
That
gotta
would have been
remember
perfect. I
that
think I
all of
just
these
fucked it
sacred
up.
writings have gone through multiple layers of translation by people who may or may not have understood the original doctrines that were concealed in there symbolically and mathematically. Also from the book of the reference to the new song is very interesting, because and I would defer later to Jeremy on this, who's been studying the sacred geometry of music, but there is a Phrygian mode of representing the octave that goes from 432 cycles per second to 864 cycles per second. So the reference to singing a new song suggests to me that possibly we're talking about a change in frequency involving life here on earth, and that those who change their consciousness accordingly will be in harmony with the changing frequencies. And I believe that that is one of the core teachings of this, is that as Earth goes through its evolutionary journey through the galaxy, through varying geometric relationships with the astronomical universe, what is happening is that the frequencies impinging upon the Earth are constantly going through an evolution as well. And part of understanding ancient secrets or methods of the master builders of old was utilizing the sacred geometry and the geodetic knowledge to create structures that resonated with the earth, because they were harmonically attuned to the earth. I think that's part of what's going on. I'm trying to understand the sacred science behind structures like the Parthenon and the Great Pyramid and many of the other temples, is this science of harmony, of the science of resonance, and creating structures that
Thanks, bro.
vibrated
Thanks, bro. That was a
according to
close one,
certain
yeah.
frequencies.
Yeah, I don't think it
Those
was fast
frequencies
enough
would be
anyways.
attuned to the
Even with
slowly
that pause
changing
mess up,
frequencies
and I
of
got
the
boosted
earth
out. What up,
itself
man? How are you, dude?
as it goes on its cosmic
Thanks for
journey
being here, man.
through the universe. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away.
Yeah, man, we're
and
close,
I, John,
dude.
saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem.
We are close. I'm gonna stop streaming though in like a few minutes though, my man. Sorry,
right?
dude.
864, that's the Jerusalem. Coming down from
I gotta
God out
go
of heaven,
somewhere.
prepared as a bride.
So I might stream another 10 more
adorned for her
minutes or so.
husband. And there came unto me one of the 7 angels, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious. It had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon. Now, of course, those names are mathematical keys. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations.
Why?
and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city. So here again, we have this idea of the measuring of the city, because the city is the repository of the cosmic doctrine. The gates thereof and the wall thereof. And the city lieth 4 square, and the length
Cool, bro.
is as large
Thanks, man.
as the breadth.
Thanks, bro.
And
Thanks,
he
man.
measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and the height of it are equal. And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. Now I find that verse to be particularly potent in its meaning, because first of all, we have to ask the question, what are we talking about what is the Bible talking about when it refers to angels? Well, you know, the counterpart to angels are found in all cultures. It's just in the Bible they're called angels, who are the messengers, right, from this other domain. But in other cultures, they were usually referred to as the gods. And basically, in the Christianization of the ancient pagan traditions, the gods were replaced by the angels, but their function within the cosmic hierarchy is identical. And so, the fact that the measure of a man, a human, is the same as the measure of the angel is very interesting, because it's saying that we're somehow linked to the gods through a common system of measure. But notice the numbers, 144 cubits. Of course, you got to ask, what is a cubit? And that leads us into some interesting digressions there. Also the 12,000 furlongs. Well, anybody know how much a furlong is? What is a furlong? Furlongs have almost fallen into disuse. It's a British or English unit of measurement, but it found its way into the King James Bible. It was basically the British counterpart of the Greek stade, which had various lengths, but basically the same length as the furlong. What was the furlong? Furlong, where is a furlong used today? Yeah, who goes to the track? Horse racing. A furlong is 660 feet, 1/8 part of a mile. Well, here's what's interesting about the furlong. If you multiply it by 12 to convert it to inches, you discover that the furlong is exactly 7,920 inches. Where did we see that number? This is now a test of your memory. The diameter of the Earth. Remember I said the diameter of the Earth taken through the tropics, the sacred number that's representing the Earth? The furlong is to the inch as the Earth is to a mile. It's a proportion. This is a sacred proportion that was intentionally embodied into the units of measurement. So that we lay out a furlong, right, 660 feet, 1 inch, which is derived from our thumb, the width of our thumb, right there, you can check it out. Put your thumb on there, and you'll discover it's 1 inch wide.
There's like a frame away there.
So the thumb is to your foot in this cosmic relationship of 12 to 1. And when you pace, like this is how a pace was generally considered. You start from one point, put your heel against a point, and then every other step you count. 1, 2, 3. 1,000 of those, averaging 5.28 feet, gave us the mile. Right? 1,000 times 5.28 is 5,280. And that was the origin of the mile. The mile is literally a mill, 1,000 human paces. The pace, think about the pace, what that is. Our foot, our pace. Our pace, our foot is what anchors us to the earth. Our pace is what moves us about the face of the earth, right? The most fundamental relationship we have with the earth, our feet, right? That ratio of pace to foot, 5.28. Now, we have, the furlong is 12,000 of these things, right? 12,000, the holy city is 12,000 of these things, 660 feet. Multiply that out, you discover 7,920,000 feet. So how big is that? We'll divide that by the number of feet in a mile, 5,280, and what you discover is it's precisely 1,500 miles. So what would be 1,500 miles in diameter? Is there some object out there that could be 1,500 miles in diameter? It's certainly described as being something they see in the heavens, right? Well, I'll leave this one an open-ended question for right now, but here's something that's interesting. If we take this number and divide it into, compare it to the Earth to get a sense of scale, Earth 7920, Holy City 1500. So we put 7920 over 1500, and if you quickly do that calculation in your head, you'll discover that 1500 goes into 7920 exactly 5.28 times the relationship of our foot to our pace. So here's a very strange correlation. The Earth to the Holy City is the same as the pace to the foot. What are they trying to say there? Well, one of the implications of this, it follows from this truth. The truth is that we humans are ultimately designed according to the cosmic measure. We were created in the image of God, right? And God is the ultimate cosmic measure. And we, being created in the image of God, embody the cosmic measures. So when Protagoras said man is the measure of all things, what he was implying is that we are the ultimate yardstick for the cosmos. In fact, when one looks at the scale of phenomena, from the human up to the largest macro scale that we know of, and from the human down to the smallest micro scale we know of, where are we within that hierarchy? Right smack in the middle. So there's as much above us as there is below us. There's as much greater than us as there is lesser than us.
Come on, man.
And I think that's one of the implications of this, is that when we begin looking at our sacred geometry, we realize it's the ultimate fusion of all of these phenomena on all scales, and the ultimate component, or the ultimate symbol of all that fusion is we ourselves. And then, of course, ultimately it's our consciousness, because, like I said, with his name written in our forehead, what that means is that when you study sacred geometry, you're literally building an edifice in your consciousness. You're building a form out of your own, the material of your own conscious mind that reflects this order of nature, of cosmic nature that's all about us. And that's the power, and why study of sacred geometry can ultimately be a key to accessing lots of other things like the Kabbalah and the alchemy and the Hermetic wisdom and the Gnostic traditions and the traditions of the Vedas and so forth. There it is, 12,000 furlongs. The city lieth foursquare. 48,000 furlongs on a perimeter. It's also described as cubical. 12,000 furlongs equals 7,920,000 feet, which equals 1,500 miles. The total perimeter, 31,680. That has a profound mystical significance, which we will save for another time. So there it is, a tabulation of some of the stuff we've covered.
Come on, this fucking
the diameter of the
bro.
Earth,
Dude,
7920.
what was that? Like, look at
One
this.
furlong,
Guys,
7920
look at this.
inches. The diameter of the New Jerusalem, 7,920,000 feet, which is 1,500 miles. 1 mile is 5,280 feet, or 1,000 paces of 5.28 feet. 1.5 miles is 7,920 feet. And here's the pace to the foot, equals the Earth to the Holy City, which equals 7,920 to 1,500, and there's that magic ratio of 5.28 that links the Earth to this other cosmic entity, for now going unnamed, that relates to our own scale exactly as our pace does to our foot. And what you discover is that if you're taller or shorter, it doesn't matter, because it's a proportional relationship. If you're taller, your pace, my pace is in excess of 6 feet. So 5.28, you're going to have a somewhat shorter, but you're going to discover that the ratio is relatively constant. Because as you get taller, presumably your feet get bigger, with some exceptions, right? I know some little people with really big feet. And Here is the Hebrew cubit, which is 18 inches. Remember, 144 cubits according to the measure of a man, that is of the angel. We have the Egyptian royal cubit of 1.727 feet. The wall of the city was 144 cubits. If we take the 144 cubits that are
I think I'm done. Like maybe one or two more runs, honestly.
Or 2,592 inches.
Then I gotta
Add
go.
1 0 on the end of that, and we have the great year cycle, 25,920 years. If we express it instead in Egyptian cubits, which may have been the original intent, if not implying that either cubit was legitimate, 144 Egyptian royal cubits of 144 times 1.727, 248.814. Move the decimal over 2 points. You got 24,881.4. Call that miles. And there's the circumference of the Earth. 24,881 miles. So there's all kinds of information embedded in here, but you've got to have the key to begin to unlock it. Okay, and then also notice that the moon, 2,160 miles, or 17,280 furlongs, if we set the diameter of the moon to the diameter of the holy city, there's our 1.44 ratio. So what we have here is this redundance over and over again. We have these same numbers recurring over and over again in the measure of time and space, both in absolute dimensions but also in the proportional relationships that result from comparing these various entities of time and space. As we've learned now, the diameter of the moon is 2160 miles, the diameter of the sun is 864,000. As it turns out, if you take the diameter of the sun and multiply it by this number right here, it gives us the distance between the Earth and the sun. And if we take the diameter of the moon, which is 2160, multiply it by the same factor of 108, we discover that we now have the Earth-Moon distance. So it's this 108 factor, this 108 spacing, this proportional relationship. We could express it this way. Solar distance to solar diameter equals lunar distance to lunar diameter, and the value of that proportion is the sacred number 108. As we see embodied right here in Ba Heng of Cambodia from the 12th century with its 108 towers. And there are many examples of how these numbers were incorporated into the fabric of sacred architecture. That there has been some kind of a universal system at use in the ancient world. And these various cultural groups, whether it was the Egyptians or Sumerians or Mayans or the Hopewellians or the megalithic builders, had access to some universal system from some source that was outside their own cultural context. And I suggest that the source of that goes back into deep time, that takes us back beyond the threshold of known history into the realm of mythical history, which means we're going back like into the Ice Age, back into the Pleistocene, to use the geologist term, back into the deep recesses of the human tenure on planet Earth, whose only memory has come down to us not in the form of recorded history, but in the form of myth and epic story and legend and so forth. Because as it turns out, if we, and this is again is a good topic for the sacred geometry class, when we analyze Plato's description of Atlantis, Plato basically gave the date of the sinking of Atlantis as 9,000 years prior to Solon, the Egyptian, the Athenian poet and statesman. Solon did a 10-year exile in Egypt, and it was Solon that brought back the tale of Atlantis and presented it to the Greeks. And Solon basically made that journey around 600 BC. So if you add the 9,000 years to the 600 BC, we come up with a date of about 11,600 years ago for Plato's date for the demise of Atlantis. Well, it's very interesting that the date 11,600 years has been independently discovered by geologists looking at the tempo of various catastrophes that have occurred on Earth. And to those catastrophes is where I'm now going to turn. Catastrophes in the time of man, the tempo of global change. What I've done here is I put a time bar that goes from the present, right here. This is us now. This is today. Right here is May 3rd at 4 o'clock. Is it 4 o'clock? That's right here. And this is 150,000 years ago. And the reason I used 150,000 years is that some of the earliest skeletal remains ever discovered of modern humans date back to 150 to even to 180,000 years.
Why? What are you doing,
that appear
game?
to be indistinguishable from a modern skeleton, which suggests that modern humans with presumably equivalent intelligence to our own were present on the planet at least this far back. So here we've got a 150,000 year time span. You'll notice this little red bar at the end. That red bar represents the span of recorded history, which is basically the advent of Sumerian cuneiform writing. So if it turns out that there were modern humans living through this whole span of time, why is there no history? Well, now you got to do is turn to these various things that I've put on here. These are events that have occurred. And I used a certain criteria for these.
Alright, 2 more minutes and I'm gonna
Here's the
sign off.
criteria I used. I began studying
We are really close though, man.
the record of geological change, climate change, environmental change, and I focused on events that could be considered catastrophic. And catastrophic to the extent that were an event of an equivalent magnitude to occur now, it would basically end civilization as we know it. That's the criteria. What would be the magnitude of an event that it would take to terminate our modern industrial civilization? That's the criteria that I used. Then I began to search through the record of all of the events that would be of that magnitude or greater. And the events that I found so far have been entered onto this graph, and they're listed all here. You can see them. And how many do we have here? And this is not complete necessarily, but we have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 of them in 150,000 years. So at least 16 times in the last 150,000 years, there have been climate or environmental or geological catastrophes.
I can't just like ever work out like ever.
That were they
Come on, man.
to occur today would essentially put us back into the Stone Age. Would essentially, if you think about some of the small catastrophes we have seen in the last few years, from the destruction of New Orleans to the great tsunami, you know, to some of the big earthquakes that we've seen.
I don't think it's
New Orleans
pace.
is still not
Also
recovered.
fucked it up there. Like,
But
what?
you got to
Like
imagine
this
what
stupid
would
fucking
happen
game.
if an event that was 1 order of magnitude greater than Katrina happened. By that I mean 10 times worse. Let's say that we had 10 cities decimated to the extent of New Orleans. We could certainly recover from it, but it would be a major effort to do so. Now what if we were talking about 2 orders of magnitude? Let's say, to put it into a rough equivalency, an event that could cause the decimation of 100 major urban areas. Could we recover from that? Questionable. Now let's go 3 orders of magnitude. And now we're talking about the equivalent of 1,000 major cities completely decimated. Okay, at that level, 3 orders of magnitude, that's what these are. Those are events that essentially would be 3 orders of magnitude. Once you begin to ponder this, it becomes apparent why there isn't a record, an extant record of what's been going on for the whole time that we humans have been here. Now, at this point, you probably haven't tied this in with what we've been saying before, other than I'll point out a few things to you that should be
I don't think
onset of the late Wisconsin Ice Age.
Oh, come
26,000 years before present. Remember the great
Game,
year
man. Fuck
precessional
his
cycle?
game. Come on.
Add about 80
Fuck
years
you.
to that, we've got 26,000.
Like, fuck
Of course,
you.
26,000 you could figure plus or minus a few centuries.
There's this stupid fucking
Now,
glass door. They
come
gave me the
through that
stupid
cosmic
fucking
clock that I
bullshit there.
showed you, right? Halfway to the cusp of the age of Leah. 12,900 years ago, roughly. And what happened? We have something that happened 12,900 years before present, onset of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, first phase of the megafaunal extinctions. Now here what I've done is I've entered some green dots. Now look at
That's
what
the worst
green
thing
dots
that
are.
could
The
have
green
happened. Like, that's
dots
just
are
such fucking
basically
bullshit.
derived directly from the model of the great year, based upon cycles of 6,480, 12,960, and then 25,920. And you'll notice how high of a correlation there is between the tempo of events, the actual events that have been derived by scientists without any reference to this great year model at all, and the timing of these ages of the world. Remember the 6,480 years, that was the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. And according to the traditions, each of those seasons of the great year is inaugurated by some type of a great event, a transformative event, a catastrophe, if you will. And what I've done here is I have developed a data set that shows the correlation. It certainly seems from a study of this graph that these intervals, these event nodes as I call them, the susceptibility of something happening goes up exponentially for a short period of time. Here's the analogy that I have used. You're out driving along a quiet country road, you've got it on, you know, cruise control, you're kicking back, you're listening to some tunes, you're not paying much attention, you know, you're talking on your cell phone, not much traffic. Okay, now you come up to a major highway. The cars are like this. Well, you're crossing that intersection, and while you're crossing that intersection, now suddenly you got to put your cell phone down and start paying attention, because if you don't, you're going to get T-boned, right?
Ooh.
Well, obviously, you've got your whole journey, and each time you cross an intersection of a major highway, you know, the potential of a catastrophe increases considerably over what it would be while you're out there on the lonely country road. Well, you see, our planet is on a cosmic highway around the galaxy. And we're now beginning to understand the fine structure of the galaxy, and we realize that there is a pattern and an order to it. And there's a tempo of these orbital revolutions. There's a tempo of the galaxy. And there's a wave pattern of the Earth moving up and down, above and below the galactic plane. And within that, there are suborbital cycles as well. And we also discover that there seems to be a tempo in the delivery of cosmic matter to the inner solar system. It doesn't seem to be random. And this is going to be beyond the scope of today's lecture, but what I'm getting at here is that the evidence now supports the conclusion that the delivery of cosmic material and energy, the energy pulses that would be affecting Earth, are non-random, that they are on some kind of a cosmic timetable, a cosmic tempo, if you will. And I think this is one of the most important insights we get from these ancient traditions, is the measurement of cosmic time and how it relates to us here on Earth. You just got to know what to look for and where to look for it. Once you begin to become aware of it and you begin to see it, you begin to realize that the cosmic fingerprints are everywhere about us. We're in fact living in and upon the wreckage of the former worlds. The rubble of these former worlds is all around us, but we haven't had the scale of perspective to see it. And that's where we're at now. I'm completely thrilled with things like the emergence of Google Earth, because Google Earth is now allowing us to all of us to sit at our computers and see the cosmic perspective of Earth. And when you look at it from the extraterrestrial point of view, things begin to show up that we don't see when we're right down here immersed on it so close that we're like ants walking on the rubble and can't see what's around us. But we do see that we literally have built our own world and our own social system on top of and out of the wreckage of former worlds.
Alright, I'm gonna sign off right now, I think. Yeah. After this run. Thanks for being here, Russ and Bukakis and Lurkers and Desideratum and everyone. Moonraker. Yeah, that 24 is a heartbreaker, man. Thank you, Dynamics, for the raid, bro. Golden Knife.